Can I send a big warm welcome? My name is Jonathan Lester and I'm the chair of this committee. So I'm now going to ask for the live feed to be started and I start all over again.
Confirm, Chairman, that we're live streaming.
Thank you. So, welcome to this meeting of the Connected Communities Scrutiny Committee being held on Monday the 13th of February 2023. My name's Jonathan Lester, Councillor, and I will be chairing this meeting today. For those present in the meeting room, if there's a fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and all the other relevant information of this meeting are available for public viewing on Herefordshire Council's website. Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. To ensure that the recording quality is maintained, please speak as clearly as possible, keep background noise to a minimum. Please ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph or record the meeting, provided it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If there are any members of the public present who do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please raise your hand now so that such persons filming or photographing may be made aware. Only committee members present in the meeting room may vote. We have a number of people in attendance in this room and also virtual participants. And for those participants who are joining us virtually, please can you use the raise hand function on the system if you wish to contribute to the meeting. So, on with the agenda. Apologies for absence. We have apologies for councillors Tracy Bowes, Tony Fagan, Kath Hayes, Paul Andrews. Any other apologies?
That's the same, Chairman.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Can they be asked, like?
Pardon?
Can they be asked? That's terrible.
They've given apologies for good reason, Jim. Thank you.
Okay. Not everyone can attend the meeting. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is to clarify the name substitutes. So please can I have the so Councillor Felicity Norman is in attendance remotely.
Yes.
Welcome, Councillor Norman. And Councillor Norman is substituting Councillor Fagan.
Chair, I don't know if you can hear me, but I can't hear anything now.
Is that what you're saying?
Oh, it's back on, thank you.
Jolly good. If you get cut off again, please let officers know, because we need you to. Well, we don't want you to drop out at any stage. Thank you. Thanks for letting us know. Agenda item 4 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of November last year, and this is included in agenda pages 9 to 16. There have been no notifications of any alterations needed. Are we all content to sign the minutes as an accurate record? Yeah. All in agreement? Councillor Kenyon?
Yeah, always.
Yep.
Always agree with you.
Okay. Okay then, excellent. We move on to agenda item 5. The committee has received 4 questions from members of the public for this meeting. As a response to each of these questions and the answers that have been provided have been published. Those members of the public who have submitted questions have the opportunity to ask a supplementary question. Supplementary questions are no more than 1 minute in length and must include a question. Right, so I'll now ask the clerk to confirm if supplementary questions are to be asked.
Thank you, Chair. We have supplementary questions in attendance, but I'll read Mark quick. Would you like to ask your question, please?
Thank you. I sent in a question regarding the Safer Streets campaign. And my supplementary question is, how will you cover the rural part of the county, the small market towns and the villages, some of which are expanding with new building? Because what I thought was that you'd focus very much on Hereford and not on the rest of the county.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent question. So there's a question to all those present, and if anybody would like to venture an answer, then please introduce yourself when you do, explaining your role. But the question, excellent question, is the Safer Streets policy too Hereford-centric or city-centric, shall we say?
I can answer,
Councillor Tyler?
Yeah, thank you. I'd introduce myself. I'm Councillor Ange Tyler. I'm the Cabinet Member for Housing, Regulatory Services and Communities. I'm Chair of the Hereford Community Safety Partnership. Thank you very much for your further question. Yes, the Safer Street is, around the Hereford Centre at the moment, but we are looking to go into the rural areas and sort of with our programmes that we can sort of tackle those areas as well. But I do agree that we are sort of Hereford Centre at the moment, but we are aware that we need to go out further. But with the resource at the moment, that's very difficult. I do acknowledge your question. I think that's a very good question. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the answer, Councillor Tyler. Perhaps that's something our committee could expand upon in our questions.
Yeah.
Councillor Summers.
Yeah, I thoroughly agree with the question also. We have major issues in the rural areas for everything, policing and the whole works. It's very rare that we see anyone, might see a drive-by occasionally. And I've tried to, my wife, for example, who's the chair of the Home Lacey, she's tried to set up meetings and not being able to, so yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Summers. But as I say, it was an excellent question from the member of the public, Mrs. Markwick, but perhaps we can expand on these ideas and the thoughts you have whilst we're in the item that's coming up. Okay, next question.
Yes, Chair, we've had a supplementary written question from Jackie Malloy, so if you bear with me, I'll just see if I can display that. So that is, thank you for the response to my initial question. I'd like to ask supplementary in writing, as I won't be present at the meeting, and that is to ask, what work is taking place to collect data from the other agencies and not just the police? As the CSP acknowledges that this is a challenge it is to overcome and it undermines the potential value of the strategic analytical reports, is the Scrutiny Committee clear about what the obstacles are to achieving better information on which the CSP can base decision making and resource allocation?
Thank you. Well, that question is pretty much directed at this scrutiny committee, and I think it's an excellent question. And the best way to answer that question is to address the point that's been raised and ask the Community Safety Partnership what are the challenges, so that we can get a better understanding of what those challenges are, so that we can perhaps, as a result of that conversation, make good recommendations to assist the Community Safety Partnership moving forward. So thank you to Jackie Malloy for an excellent question, supplementary question, and we'll use that as a template to get the ball rolling with our discussion. So thank you for that very good question. Thank you to the 4 members of the public who asked the questions and members of the public who attend.
We've got more, we've still got another one.
Oh, one more, excellent.
I'll just check, the next question was Mr. Tector. I don't know if you have Mr. Tector present. No, we don't. So the final questioner was Sheila Marsh. So I don't know if you wish to ask a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I have to press it. My original question was about the work in schools on education and attitudinal change around violence against women and girls. And it was great in the answer to see that obviously a lot is going on and that it's a priority going forward and that the Purple Leaf programme is funded till 2024. My supplementary question is, how is any change in attitudes being evaluated on schools programmes rather than simply positive immediate feedback, which is great, but it doesn't tell us about attitude change. And given the various commissioning challenges and ideas about train the teacher as a way forward for this programme, that takes the attitudinal change checking back another step. So I want to know really what are the plans for looking at attitudinal change in schools.
Thank you for the question. So, attitudinal change. Any thoughts? Councillor Tyler.
Thank you for your question. Yes, it's unfortunate we haven't got more feedback actually. We do address that the Purple Leaf programme is making a huge difference in the educational programme, but the outcome of whether we can looking at the attitudes from young people and how they perceive sexual violence, we are still waiting on that, and I think over the next 12 months, hopefully we will see more information coming forward to see what changes are there in attitudes, because that is so important in our schools that we see that change amongst pupils and hopefully look after each other. So that's ongoing, and hopefully we can report that in the next 12 months. Attitude changes.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Just to let the committee know that Councillor Toynbee, the Cabinet Member for Children and Families, is listening in. Can't participate in the meeting, but she is listening in and asked for that point to be noted by the committee. Thank you. As I say, thank you to the members of the public who are in attendance and for those who have asked questions. It's really important that members of the public feel that they can participate in the scrutiny process, and I thank them for their efforts. Next item on the agenda is agenda item 6, which is, has the committee received any questions from members of the council, and I confirm that no questions have been received. So we proceed with the rest of the meeting. So there's 2 items on the agenda today for this meeting. One is to talk about and scrutinise the function of the Herefordshire Community Safety Partnership, and the other one is to discuss the public realm contract, which we will be talking about after this item. But to get the ball rolling, we have a cabinet member responsible for the Community Safety Partnership from Herefordshire Council's perspective, and Councillor Tyler is present and will give a presentation. We have officers present, we have representatives from the Community Safety Partnership, and we have the Police and Crime Commissioner that's present as well, John Campion. So we've got a full house, and we've got people participating from Zoom as well. So if I can start with you, Councillor Tyler, you have your presentation, and then as people might know, I like to get the ball rolling with a short presentation, and then we can have the question and answer session, which is where the real work of scrutiny takes place. So over to you, Councillor Tyler. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering whether we'd like to introduce the partners that are sat around the table.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
So on my right we have the officer Adrian Turton, who supports myself with all the back work in the office and does an excellent job with all the presentation here today. Anna, do you want to go along?
Yeah, hello everybody. My name's Anna Davidson. I'm the Assistant Director for Prevention at Hereford and Worcester Fire and Rescue Service. It's a pleasure to be here.
Morning everybody. Helen Wayne, Superintendent, led the Policing Commander for Herefordshire, for West Mercia Police.
Morning, Paul Middleborough, Assistant Police and Crime Commissioner.
John Campion, the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Hi, I'm Hope Spade. I'm the High Partnership Element for West Mercia Police.
Want to say something?
Good morning everybody, I'm Adrian Turton, I'm a Partnership Officer working for Herefordshire Council, and my role is to support the Community Safety Partnership, and also I support the two safeguarding partnerships too. We also have delegates that are online or representing the CSP online at the meeting today, Councillor.
Chair, do you want the ones online to present themselves as well?
Yes, for the benefit of the meeting, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So there's Hilary Hall.
Good morning, everyone. Hilary Hall, Corporate Director, Community Wellbeing, Herefordshire Council.
And John Barnes.
Good morning, John Barnes, Chief Transformation Delivery Officer for Herefordshire, working between the ICB and Wye Valley Trust.
Thank you, everybody. Ben, are we going to put the presentation up, or should I go from the slides?
No, yeah.
Thank you. It's a quick presentation from the Hereford Community Safety Partnership. It's from the slides I've got here today. So the Community Safety Partnerships were set up under the Crime and Disorder Act of 1998. The five responsibility of partnerships are ourselves, Herefordshire Council, West Mercia Police, Hereford and Worcester Fire and Rescue Service, Hereford and Worcester Integrated Care Board, and the probation services. So Herefordshire Council provides a statutory scrutiny function for the CSP. So over the last 3 years, the CSP strategy is informed by a strategic assessment and ongoing data and thematic reports. We have a current strategy at the moment from April 21 to 24, which is called Our Plan to Keep You Safer. The plan outlines priorities and approaches to tackle crime and disorder in Herefordshire. At present, we have two strategic priorities. One is to prevent violence against women and girls, and to reduce the harm from domestic abuse. You'll also see there are other priorities that we have to deal with, and that's working towards reducing crime and disorder in the area, including antisocial behaviour, combat the misuse of drugs, alcohol and other substances in the area, reducing reoffending in Herefordshire, commission domestic homicide reviews, process community triggers, work with Hereford and Worcester combating drugs and partnership. So we have a 10-year plan on drug, crime and save lives. And also we have now the new serious violence duty of 2021 that has just come through from the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill. So to deliver our strategy, we have various priority groups and subgroups. And then you'll see further on there's an actual organised structure of the groups that feed into the Community Safety Board. We have a quarterly meeting and reports come from the various boards that sit with the CSP. Data is provided quarterly of all crime summaries and thematic reviews, provided by the OPC, our CSP analytical team based at Police HQ. We also have a PCC grant fund, and it was 100,000 this year, which helps with different programmes that groups come to us to seek funding. I'd like to point out at that time that the funding is not does not pay towards the officer and work programme work of the Partnership Board at this time. There is no specific dedicated external funding as well. So the next slide, where you will see the detailed structural organisational structure, where the Hereford Community Safety Board sits at the top, with all the other different subgroups feeding into us on a quarterly basis. It's very detailed. The next one is data regarding the violence against women and girls. You will see in Herefordshire over the last 3 years it has increased to 27 offences per 100,000 population, which is one of the lowest in the West Mercia area. Our priority 2, next slide please, is domestic abuse. We've seen an average up and down through COVID, but it is starting to creep back up, and that shows you on part of this structure chart here. All the data that comes from the police, and it records all crimes through our quarterly report. And as you can see, over 2022, our crime in the area is increasing. Next slide. So comparative data, as was requested from the Scrutiny Committee, comparing to the rest of the areas, we are a total recorded crime of 12,382. It's not one of the lowest, but it's quite high, with the recorded crime of 64 over 1,000 population. So in brief, from the Community Safeguarding Partnership, there are lots of positives that we have done over the last 2 to 3 years. We've done from the sexual violence strategy, we are just about to bring this back to the Community Safety Partnership in March to look at adopting a strategy for 23-28. We've had a really successful Safer Streets programme, including pulling over 500,000 external funding, which has brought in Time for Change campaign and website, increased and improved CCT coverage and provision, education initiatives in schools, working with the nighttime economy, and clearance of undergrowth and vegetational footpaths to improve sight lines. We also have our quarterly crime summaries. We work with the Domestic Abuse Local Partnership Board. We have Programme 19 DA training awareness courses, especially with the White Ribbon campaign that was delivered last November. We do have good attendance from the HCSP and subgroups. We've got 100,000, as I said before, PCC grant funding, and we are working with the community for the Safe Streets consultation, and primarily the HWEG, who are our scrutineers in terms of looking at sexual violence against women and girls. And we are also on track to deliver the serious violence duty, which has to start from January. Our challenges is evidencing the impact. We haven't done any surveys how we are doing in the community, what we can do in the future. Do we know if people do feel safe? We need to understand that picture. Are we making any specific areas? I think we are in areas. Refresh our community trigger process, because that comes in primarily to the council, and we haven't got the resource around it to do it as best we could. Reduce capacity with partners engagement. The crime rates packed to pre-COVID levels, and they're exceeding now pre-COVID that we've just shown. And maintain effective partnership, working with stretched and reduced resources. That's a brief overview of our report to you, Chair. But I would just like to say thank you to the members of the HCSB board, colleagues from all agencies and volunteers for their efforts over the past year to deliver the Community Safety Partnership strategy and interventions. So thank you very much, and welcome questions and with the other partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tyler. There are other members of the community partnership. Would anybody else like to make any initial comments to begin with? John Campion, Police and Crime Commissioner.
Thank you, Chairman, and grateful to be here and the opportunity to participate. Now, ironically, when the CSPs were established, police and crime commissioners didn't exist. And so I'm not a statutory member of the CSP, but of course the police are those that I govern, and indeed, as referred to by Councillor Tyler, I do provide some of the infrastructure funding. Maybe I'm an old bureaucrat at heart, but these types of meeting, the annual requirement of these types of meeting, I think are really important to drive focus and activity. And I welcome the opportunity this year, after a bit of a gap, for that to happen. Because time's moved on since legislation came into place, absolutely, and the world has massively changed. But one of the core central roles, I think, of the CSP and the ability of this committee to hold it to account, to scrutinise it, is to check the effectiveness. And one hopefully will be part of the discussion today is to understand how effective the CSP is at driving outcomes in terms of focusing activity and resources of partners. Now, I concur with Councillor Tyler, there is always more that can be done with more, and indeed resources require prioritisation, don't they? But it's how, and indeed the CSP is driving its statutory bodies, the 270 odd million that West Mercia Police, for example, spend, how that's directed towards it. So I am very keen to play my part, and I provide the resource of the 100,000 that Councillor Tyler referred to, and I'm pleased to see that deployed. But I think the more exciting part of the CSP's work is how we deploy others. And I just wanted to very briefly touch on some parts where I also can assist. IDFA services here, this part of West Mercia, benefiting from the £1 million that we spend on IDFA services now, including some targeting around young people and intrafamiliar domestic abuse, £1.5 million around ISFA, so that's specialist sexual violence support, how we prevent this. So rolling out Drive, which is a high-level domestic abuse perpetrator programme here in Herefordshire. Really grateful for the partnership work with the council to see that rolled out here. Men and masculinities. A number of the questions submitted absolutely connected with part of the root cause of the problem, which is elements of the behaviours of men in sexual or domestic abuse situations, and how we support our young people to turn into responsible adults. And then, very lastly, how we support some of the work in a very, very complex health environment, which also is key to not only supporting those who might be the victims of crime, but more importantly, how we support our community to be safe and resilient to stop crime happening in the first place. So, again, some work as to my role in that. One of the reasons I wanted to travel here this morning and take part in the debate and the discussion was that reconfirmation and recommitment to, yes, we have to deal with crime as it happens, and we are seeing it creep back up, but we have to be resolute in our commitment that we believe that we can change that outcome, i.e. we can eradicate violence against women and girls. We can dramatically reduce the different crime that's causing harm in our community. And my challenge for the panel will be today, does your CSP truly represent itself as a body that believes that also? Because I'm willing to help absolutely wherever I can, because I think Herefordshire is a great place to live, work and visit, but we need to make sure it continues to be a safe place.
Thank you, John. Right, we've got some questions, but would anybody else like to make any comments initially? Otherwise, we're going to go straight to questions. Great. Councillor Durkin first, and then Councillor Norman. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick one on the organogram. What's the channel panel?
Yes, I can respond to that, Councillor. Thank you. That channel panel is part of Herefordshire's prevent strategy and policy. Channel panel is where perhaps individuals that have been identified that are at risk of being radicalised, and they receive support from multiple agencies. So it's a risk assessment and a support meeting in particular to support those that are, as I say, at risk of radicalisation.
Thank you. I understand that snappy title now. My main question, Chair, if I may. Police and Crime Commissioner mentioned about young people and also domestic violence. What is in the future is going to be for the education of young people with regard to domestic violence? Because we all know that the impact of domestic violence on young people in the house or wherever does have a negative impact, obviously, because of what they're hearing and seeing. But what are we doing about educating down into the low single, 7, 8, 9, whatever the considered area is? When are we going to actually start educating young people regarding domestic violence?
Again, I could answer that, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, please, Adrian. Yes.
As part of the curriculum in schools, healthy relationship education is part of that, part of the curriculum. And extremely grateful to the Police and Crime Commissioner to deliver specialist healthy relationship education in schools. I know as one of the responses to one of the questions we received from members of the public, there was a listing of the number of children that have had healthy relationship education as part of the Safer Streets programme. And I'm losing my train of thought, apologies. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I have a follow-up then, please?
Yes, please. Yes.
Thank you, Andrew, for that information. It is essential that we engage at a lower age. But my question, follow-up for that is it working? How are we going to tell if it's working? What the outcome? How do we know it's going to be actually a good thing?
Yes, it was. I mean, it was a point that Councillor Tyler raised, and it's all about how do we evidence the impact of these policies that we're using? And so, really, the question that could be expanded is we know it's being taught in schools, but where's the evidence that the initiative is beginning to have its effect?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to reiterate what I did say, thank you. This is really a new programme. We've been doing it over the last 12 months. So hopefully in the next 12 months, we should have more evidence of how it is sort of deep diving into years. We've got year 6, which is primary age, 9 and 12, which is in the secondary schools. So I'm hoping in the next 12 months, when we report back in 12 months, we'd have more update and more positive communication from the schools about how attitudes are changing and what we can do to better our programme, hopefully with further funding to do this, especially the Purple League programme.
Okay, and following up on that, yes, it's a new initiative for Herefordshire, but it must have been implemented elsewhere. Do we know how evidence is gathered, and how can we be confident that the evidence that we're looking for can be quantified?
Yes, thank you for the question, Chair. I think we can sort of gather more evidence across all the other CSPs in West Midlands, because we can challenge each other's data. We can see if there's trends. Are we making a difference in certain areas compared to our area? And if other areas are making a difference, we can speak to them and find out what they are doing to sort of help with that attitude of young people. And I'd like to hopefully be able to address that next time.
Sorry, just another follow-up. Excellent that you've got a strategy in place for next year for actually looking at the impact on young people. Do you have any plans as to how you're going to understand the impact from the parents down or the caregivers down to the children, rather than just asking the children how are they feeling? Forgive me, I don't mean to trivialise this, it's just why I'm putting it in inverted commas. It's about getting the rounder picture so that we're actually confident that what we're seeing is actually meaningful.
Very good question, Councillor Durkin. I think that is further work to do. It's when we sort of go back into the schools and we get the feedback from parents, because this is all a learning thing for us as well. And I think that's really crucial to understand whether families are feeling that their children are learning and understanding against the terrible peer abuse. And if we can get parents behind the programme as well, then hopefully our children will go through school understanding that it's not acceptable.
Thank you. If I could ask that to be an actual outcome today, Chair. And in addition to that, if we look at the other end, elder abuse, that needs to be tackled as well. I know it passed on our part of the community, and I think that's something that should be addressed as well, elder abuse and how that impacts upon children, etc. That can be an outcome, part of the outcome.
Thank you. Right.
Could I have a commentary on that, please?
Certainly.
Yeah, I think that's we can look at that through our data collection, and especially through the police analytical data. We could sort of look at that as well and report back.
Okay, thank you. Right,
Can
now.
I bring in Adrian, Chair? Sorry.
Oh, yes, Adrian.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. The issue of elder abuse is something the CSP, Community Safety Partnership, is acutely aware of. And in the action plan moving forward, we're looking at campaigns to raise awareness. And elder abuse, as in an elderly parent that possibly has been abused by a grown-up son, daughter, or an elderly partner. But I think it is an issue in Herefordshire. We are aware of it, and it's some work we need to do to make people realise that it does happen out there.
So perhaps in rurality as well.
Yeah.
Rurality, yes, and getting the message out into the whole of Herefordshire.
Thank you.
If I may, we've had 9 domestic homicide reviews in Herefordshire, 8 of which have had an elderly victim. So that shows the issue, and there's a number of recommendations that we have put in place through the domestic homicide reviews are working towards, but that's an acute issue that we need to spread the message, to be aware, and for professionals and the community to identify elder abuse, but also victims and potential victims to go and get help as well, because help is there for them. Thank you.
Thank you. John Cappian.
Thank you, Chairman. Just very briefly connect with Councillor Durkin's point, which I think are particularly pertinent in relation to young people. We've got cohorts of young people going through our schools year after year. It's the way it is, isn't it? As the educational authority, I suppose one of the questions perhaps for the panel is, are they reassured that there is that plan to make sure healthy relationships is enough of a part of that young person's experience? Because some of the work that's been referred to that's been grant funded, I think is a drop in the ocean. There needs to be sorry to use the phrase, a more sheep dip approach of where everybody goes through it to ensure that we have got that basic equipment of our young people of those skills to allow the project work to be more targeted around those more harmful behaviours. Because let's be clear, young people have got access to, I believe, harmful social media, pornography, and lots of other things today that is shaping their relationships that they will be engaging in tomorrow. And my fear is, unless we get some pace behind it to get that, again, using the terrible phrase, sheep dipping approach to all young people, I think we are going to miss an opportunity. And I don't believe it's not happening, but I'm not reassured it's happening everywhere. And I think that might be an area that the panel might be interested in.
Thank you. If I may, Chair, and I think that's essential, what the Crime Commissioner has said about the young people going through the system. I would expect us, the council, to be working with the education authority, which we are, and also the schools, to make sure that we do have this joined up approach. Because if we haven't got a joined up approach, what are we doing?
Indeed. Good series of questions there, Councillor Durkin. Right, going over to Councillor Norman.
Thank you, Chair. And quite a lot of what I was going to raise has already been covered, in fact, but I've got a couple of extra bits which I'll continue with. So my question was very much to do with really early intervention, recognising the pressures on young people and the influences that young people are under. And I think it's clear from looking at offending behaviour that a lot of the influence can come from home, children who are growing up with not specifically abusive parents, but the sort of language they're hearing, the exposure to television and other online influences can have an enormous effect on young people and literally lead to them, young men and women, being unaware that their language and their behaviour is unacceptable. And how we get to an early intervention on this is very difficult. We've talked about schools and what they are able to do, and that's very, very good to hear. But I think there, as we've heard from the Crime Commission, there needs to be a much wider approach within the community as well. We did at one time, before cuts, we had youth services, which very much were able to pick up on some of this. Don't have that anymore, at least not as it used to be. But I really would like to pin down, if I can, where the responsibility lies and where the funding comes from to be able to address this in a wider and more specific way. Schools work is excellent, but it really isn't enough, as I think we've already heard.
Thank you, Councillor Norman. Would anybody in the panel like to contribute? I think on Councillor Norman's point, it's you know, the schools work very hard to ensure that values are incorporated into their daily life and their education. And I think the challenge would be to marry those values that it's so easy to set aside if you're watching lots of television that challenges behaviour or presents behaviour, but maintaining those values and then linking that to ensuring that when those values aren't adhered to, especially in a violent way, that conflicts with how human beings should interact with one another. And I think it's that, you know, having those values instilled in younger people to, you know, respect and all of those key values that, you know, promote human well-being, but marrying those to the idea that if that is not happening and if violence is happening and those values are under threat, that there are people out there, organisations like the police and Community Safety Partnership, that need to be engaged with to ensure that you know, young children are being protected. So next question is from Councillor.
Yeah, I did ask a particular question, and that was.
Oh, sorry. So would anybody like to comment on Councillor Norman's point?
It's really where the responsibility lies, if we're able to pin that down, and where the specific funding might come from for that early intervention.
Thank you, Councillor Norman, for your question. I think the Purple Leaf programme that has come through from the Safer Streets is a huge benefit for education. The programme is looking to train the teacher as well, but it does rely on funding. Responsibility, I would say, is through education, and obviously police going into schools to tackle, you know, violence against women and girls. But it is a partnership model here that we should be all saying that education is so important. It's crucial for young people to their value toward each other, and if we can get the teachers trained as well to pick up if there is any sort of seriousness in class, then obviously that can make a safer environment for all pupils. But it is down to funding, it's down to resource, and who we define who will take the responsibility, which sometimes I find very difficult to sort of sort out. Thank you.
Okay, so before we go to John Campion, who's got his hand up, can I just ask a question about the funding issue? Because in resourcing, yes, there's the resource issue if you have to fund professionals to come in and train and put the message across. But it doesn't, those messages can be put across in ways that don't always require funding. And so in what way are, you know, when you employ trainers to go into a school setting and they've got lots of schools to visit, that requires a lot of, you know, person power. But there are key messages that can be reinforced and promoted that don't necessarily require a training program. So, you know, this idea that we can't do it unless we've got the funding, I don't think that's necessarily the true picture, is it? It helps if you've got to fund a specific initiative, but ensuring that a message is being continually, you know, promoted doesn't cost in the same way as paying for a trainer. So would you agree with me that resource may be an issue some of the time, but not necessarily all of the time to get your message across?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Very good point. I'm hoping that the train the teacher model will enable teachers to be more comfortable in tackling any issues that pupils raise. And I think the more the awareness, the more the messaging around school is really paramount here. But it's giving the teachers the power to do this. And if we can help by any way by the model, and then hopefully teachers will feel comfortable to do that going forward, then we will have that continual message in schools and in primary school as well. But I think, yes, it's not all about funding, it's that key messages all the time. If anybody else wants to say.
Thank you, Councillor. It's about getting the message across the whole of community, the whole of society. And in the report that Councillor Tyler submitted for today, there was reference to the Herefordshire Community Safety Partnership Sexual Violence Strategy, which is going to the Community Safety Partnership Board in March. And one of the specific actions in there is to recognise that employers have a key role to encourage healthy relationships. So that's something that the Violence Against Women and Girls work stream is looking to engage with businesses and the community to get these messages out. So it's not just children that are receiving these interventions in schools, that adults are encouraged to reflect positive behaviours.
Thank you. And John, you wanted to go in?
You've made the general point I wanted to allude to, because I agree, you can always do more with more, of course you can. My question is, are we reassured that as the educational authority, that they are doing enough to promote this in terms of the building emergency that I think it is in our society around young people who are going to go on to becoming adults, who are going to end up in the criminal justice system. And so therefore, yes, and I hear it a lot from some parts of Herefordshire Council about cuts and lack of resources, which we can have that debate, fine, but I am also very interested, and are we reassured that the resources we have are being deployed against the priority we have got, which young people and vulnerabilities in young people and the huge financial costs that then place on this authority when it goes to the situation it ends up being, I would suggest absolutely needs to be done sooner rather than later. And I genuinely don't think the council is reassured that in terms of the healthy lifestyle and its role as an educational authority, it is fully reassured. And if it is, I haven't seen the evidence or the product of that.
Chairman, if I could just come in on that, I mean, it's a valuable point that the Commissioner makes, I think. And when we go to our talents from this meeting, it's, I think, a question about whether we, as an authority, are liaising with the schools and with the education part of that authority. I think it's fundamental. We have to have an understanding that it is achieving. And that was my point. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, the danger is if we're always focused on funding, there's the temptation, if you haven't got the funding, you don't do anything. Yeah. And that can't be the case, can it? It's working smarter rather than harder, or working when we've got the funding. So I think there's a theme developing here with the committee, and I'm sure we'll be mindful of the recommendation. We'll be thinking about the recommendation, how we want to phrase it. But that's really, really helpful. Councillor Summers has been waiting very patiently, and Councillor Kenyon's been waiting even more patiently.
Chomping at the bit.
No, that won't take. Doesn't work.
Thank you, Chair. On the messages thing, there's just a statement at the moment. I'll just add it to my list here. Repetition works, and as we can tell by all the ads on TV about insurance. We have a great place. Social media is very useful. I don't think we make enough use of it, quite frankly, because we keep putting, we know what kids look at, we know what adults look at, etc., etc. It's all out there, so we should be using those things, and that wouldn't cost anything. But my question is, what is in place to counteract mental abuse? Because we're looking at physical abuse more than anything else, I think. For example, sexual violence, a lot of it It's not just the violence aspect of it, it's the manipulation aspect of it, especially in schools. I have more young people in my ward, I've got a rural ward, that are getting pregnant. Perhaps if they were given more information, or there was more healthy relationship information there, that would, and if I'm more on social media, maybe they would, that's their vehicle, let's do something about that. But it's not just physical, it is mental, and there's a lot of mental abuse. And I know from listening to people that have been coming on this, that sometimes it takes forever for a woman or man to get their story out there. Nobody wants to listen to it, and it can't happen, this can't happen to you, etc., etc. So I think we need to be more open to all aspects of domestic abuse, and because the mental abuse, in my mind, is far more, there's more of it out there actually than violence. Thank you.
Okay, so we're looking for clarification of, once we've got the two priorities.
Can I have the question answered?
Yes, yeah, but I'm just clarifying, is that focused on mental well-being as well as the physical aspect of violence?
Thank you, Councillor. A lot of the work that the Community Safety Partnership has done around education has been working with professionals and practitioners, making them aware that the damage emotional abuse and controlling behaviour can have in relationships. And more recently, we've seen, as there's been closer monitoring, a spike in stalking and harassment, and that we recognise that is obviously it's terrible for the victims. By educating practitioners, they're able to get out there and work with the community and recognise this form of abuse. Maybe there's more work to be done to spread that message with young people and the community as a whole, the public as a whole, around the damages and what is emotional and controlling behaviour.
Yeah, okay, so it sounds good, and I'm happy to hear that it's being looked at. I'd like to know action. What action is being done. It's fine teaching these people, etc., etc., etc. But if there's little action with it, then I have a concern. And I'm not seeing, and I'm narrowing the field, I know that, but I'm not seeing a lot of action. I'm seeing a lot of rhetoric, quite to put bluntly, but I'm not seeing much action. So if you could let us know what action is in place to help, what we might. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Summers. Well, in terms of what the crime has said, we've got the perpetrator programme called Drive, which are we looking to understand the perpetrator and the consequences of their choices and how they are controlling, they're abusive, the emotional blackmail that a person will go through. And I think the Drive programme that has been involved in the last 2 years has really made us understand how a perpetrator works and how they manipulate. And I think there's more evidence there that we can show and do more action. And I think it could be an action for us as we go forward with our new strategy from 24 that we could look at one of those actions, but looking at mental abuse.
I'm just going to take this a little bit further, Chair, if you don't mind, because it's not just in our schools, it's real cross-border, cross-county stuff. Places, Birmingham, Bristol, they manipulate young people to control older people, etc., etc., etc. And and this probably comes to Mr. Campion, what is in place in the police force to prevent some of this goes on, or to make young people aware that this is going on in our own backyard, because we're not hearing a lot of it except when we're having scrutiny meetings or something, then we hear about it. But I think there needs to be a lot more out there, quite frankly. And as Councillor Tyler, you said, all the stuff you just mentioned was not action, it was stuff you've been learning, okay, which is all very well. But when we can put that learning into action. Anyway, thank you very much for your answers, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. It's definitely around our messaging. It's how we can keep on delivering, look at the awareness of mental abuse. It is very important to recognise that as well, Councillor Summers. And I would consider one of those as the actions going forward in our new strategy.
That would be good action.
Okay. Right, Councillor Kenyon.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a few things to say, as always. Around the domestic abuse, I understand it's Domestic Abuse Awareness Week this week. Someone could tell me if it's wrong. I don't see anything much on, I've seen a little bit on Twitter, but nothing much else. When you Google, well, let me just jump through a little bit. I'm not a woman. I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a husband, I'm a father, and I'm a grandfather. And I know what it's like to be vulnerable because I've said this before. When I was younger, a child, an older boy tried to rape me. I fought him off. I beat him actually, and at that time I said I'm never going to be vulnerable again. I joined the army, big area as paratrooper. I'm not scared of anything. Okay, that's the way it turned me. But I know what it's like at that moment to be vulnerable. And the last thing I've never told anybody, and the last thing you want to do if you are assaulted is say anything about anything. Now, on that, I just Googled domestic abuse. First thing comes up. Solicitor claim line for being abused. That should be there, shouldn't it? The next thing, national domestic abuse. Then we've got women's aid, refuge. Then I see the 3 Rs. I'm thinking, do we use the 3 Rs? Do we know what 3 Rs are? Can anyone there tell me what 3 Rs are? I'll tell you what they are. Recognise, respond, and refer. Why aren't we putting these into our children's heads? What are we actually doing to help people? Hereford Council, I know we've got stuff, we write these policies, we put them in a cupboard, and yes, we're doing our thing, but what are we actually doing? Same with West Mercia Police, which brings me on to, I've got a few questions, so please pick up where you wish. There's some excellent work, rightly or wrongly, some excellent work being done by private citizens in catching paedophiles. They set honey traps. They turn up, when people contact them, they turn up and they get them. Now, I'm sure the police act on that once they've been, which is fantastic. But why aren't the police doing more? Is it because it's seen as a trap? Well, actually, it needs to be a trap because these people are out there. It does bring paedophiles out of the woodwork, and that's what we need to do. What's happening around organised child sexual abuse in the region? That's gangs. It goes on. I don't think for a minute it doesn't. You hear nothing about it in Herefordshire, but it goes on. The West Mercia Rape and Sexual Abuse Support Centre is a fantastic organisation, but it's self-funded. I mean, they have to go cap in hand everywhere, every time. But before they get to that, I mean, I'm jumping around a little bit, but in schools, if you want to find children that are being abused, pastoral care has to improve in schools. Because where you're going to get, it's difficult to speak to a teacher, but the pastoral care, the carers out there, they just wander around like almost, the pastoral care wander around and they're everybody's friend. And who are you going to tell if something happens? You're going to tell your friend, or or an adult, if you're going to go to that person. So every school should have more pastoral care. I'm not fussed on education. I left school with no education whatsoever. Well, they tried to educate me, to be fair, but I wasn't interested at that time. But I left that school kind, and I left that school considerate, and I've never harmed. Well, I've never been in a situation where I've had to hurt anybody that didn't need hurting. Let's just say that. So I would think pastoral care is something we should all concentrate on, and perhaps even funding from the Police and Crime Commissioner to schools for that. Coercive behaviour, I've seen it, and it's horrible. I've seen the effects of it, because the girl, or the boy, or whatever, doesn't want to believe it, because they're lovely, they've got such a grip on these people. We should be doing TikTok videos. We should show it. You know, TV is very good at TV. I don't watch the soaps, okay? Never watch the soaps. Perhaps I should a bit more. But I do know they address all these issues, and they address it nationally. What we should do is doing TikTok videos and that sort of stuff, because that's what they watch. They've got Facebook and thinking they're radical, and yeah, I'm up with it. Absolutely not. You know, Facebook's a real old thing. TikTok, Insta, all that sort of stuff, and where we should be concentrating. So we should be making films about it subtly, so people can watch them and see how coercive people change. They change people. So when I sit here and listen to what's being said, I'm kind of hopeful, but I don't think we're anywhere near it. We really don't think they're anywhere near it. Just going to check the whole thing. Yeah, so liaising between the police and social workers, again, I'm probably right, I'm not always. My wife tells me I'm never right, but there we are. She's not here today, so perhaps I can be. What are the police doing with social services around vulnerable people and children in care? Because they're the ones most likely, the most vulnerable to be picked up and abused. What are we liaising? What are we doing? We should be in there knowing potentially who these people are going to be. I know it's resources, I know it's all that sort of stuff, but I also know there is some fantastic work done by the police, and it's a groping job. I don't think there's any worse than that. Picking up on social media and finding these paedophiles and that sort of stuff, and the people that do pictures and all that around. It's a horrible job, and I know there's police burnout on it, and I have so much respect for them. But we should be doing more around cyber. We should be getting in there and getting it done. So, you know, I'll talk about speeding in cars and police resources later, but I feel more resources should absolutely be put in that. Let's look after our children. In Herefordshire, let's be the best place to live. Let's be the best, most open place where people can come and talk, they can come and speak out. This crime, this thing is only going to get worse, because children, if they don't understand something, they'll hit out. There's now LGBTQ plus out there, and if people don't understand it, they'll hit out. And that's the side where it's going to increase. There's small numbers, but that's going to be where it's going to increase. We need to put more support into that. I think kids are brighter than us, though. Kids are brighter, they understand more. But that's where it's going to rise. So I'm going to leave it there, and if there's some answers to those questions, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so many questions asked there. Do I have any takers who'd like to respond? John Cappian.
I'm sure there'll be others, both Councillor Tyler and maybe even the Superintendent might want to pick up some of the operational bits, but I heard Councillor Kenyon ask questions or speak in many forums, and always got some pertinent elements within it, to which, and I think that hitting the nail on the head around what we do to support, I think is the most pertinent. What we do to equip with information, but of course what we do to support when it has happened. And the one thing I just wanted to be clear about, the attitude here in West Mercia is you don't have to be the victim of a physical crime to get help, as in terms of support. There are a raft of services out there. You also don't have to report your incident to the police to get victim support either. We changed in my time that you can get all the way through from the most serious, impactful sexual violence incidents all the way through to something that might be lower level harm. You can still get the support whether or not you want to report it and record it with a police officer. And I think that's really important around some issues you referred to, Councillor Kenyon, over potential shame or guilt or other things that are associated with some victims, because I want to make sure somebody is happy and healthy and able to get on with their lives after whatever incident that they hadn't asked to be happened, but has happened to them anyway. And I think that's an important element of what we need to do. The other I just wanted to touch on, and others will pick up, I'm sure, some of the other bits, was around cyber, because I'm of a certain age, in my mid-40s, where what a 16-year-old or a 14-year-old is, the platform they're using, I've got no idea. I know the ones that I use, but I don't know what they're using, and how we become relevant to them, not only in our schools, but also in that digital space, is really important, because you're far more likely to be the victim of crime in West Mercia online than you are physically. But it doesn't feel like that. We don't worry about that. So therefore, how we do more as a system, I think, absolutely needs that priority. And my fear is, it's not a 14-year-old sat in this room, is it? It is people of my age and older. So therefore, how they get their priorities into our work. And so therefore, the voice of young people into things like the CSP, I think, being a vitally important element, and hence why things like a youth commission in West Mercia is something I absolutely would support and will hopefully get delivered this next year.
Thank you. Any more comments? Superintendent?
Thank you. I just wanted to come to a couple of the points that the PCC said, a couple of the points you raised, perhaps a more operational policing perspective. So I'll take them in turn. In relation to the point that you made in relation to paedophile hunter groups, absolutely, when they're active and they identify perpetrators, like you rightly said, we pick up on that and we deal with them appropriately. That's not the only way in which we get involved with such groups. So we have a force-wide online child sexual exploitation team whose specific responsibility it is to gather intelligence and take enforcement action in relation to those individuals. The difference being the paedophile hunter groups publicise widely their outcomes. We don't necessarily do that. So rest assured that kind of work is going on outside of what you see in the media.
I understand that, and that's the way I said about it. It's a gopping job to do. It's not very nice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's not very nice, and there are some great staff within our organisation that work really hard to address those issues. Secondly, you referenced how closely are the police engaged with children's services in respect of looked after children and those that are the most vulnerable. So we have staff, including our early help and intervention officers and our missing child officer, embedded in the multi-agency strategic hub with children's services and other agencies. So all of that information sharing about the most vulnerable happens there, and we're really closely linked in. So hopefully that provides you some reassurance. And then finally, just to touch on your point around controlling the coercive behaviour and back to sort of some of the more hidden mental abuse that is a big part of domestic abuse. All of our officers have undergone domestic abuse matters training, which teaches them about how controlling and coercive behaviour might manifest itself in a victim, teaches them to look beyond the obvious. You know, if you're going to a burglary, are you actually at burglary, or are you at something that's significantly more domestic abuse related and vulnerability related? And it teaches them to look for those signs and symptoms and recognise them, and how to communicate them with the victims to try and get to some of the underlying issues and vulnerabilities.
Yes, Anna Davis.
Yeah, hi. I was going to pick up on the superintendent's point from a firefighter and non-operational support staff point of view as well. Everybody in the fire and rescue service had training along the same lines, such as how to recognise signs that may then need referral back through to relevant partner agencies to take the appropriate action. Every firefighter has the training, so quite often when they go in to do a home fire safety visit or some of the youth intervention work, they may well spot something that doesn't feel quite right, and they know to refer that through to the team we've got working under me, which is part of our prevention department. So we again complement the multi-agency perspective in terms of some of those signs that we might pick up from a fire perspective. For example, this year we will be on track to undertake 6,000 home fire safety visits across Herefordshire and Worcestershire. But as part of that visit, you know, a firefighter or a support staff member will go into somebody's home. So quite often they'll pick up on things that then obviously then do need to be referred on for further work and intervention and support. Just wanted to provide that reassurance really in terms of that multi-agency perspective.
Come back on.
Yes, Councillor
You
Kennedy.
mentioned that the thing I thought was the most important thing that we can be doing is pastoral care in schools. They bang about this all the time, but no one actually mentioned that. This is what we're doing for fire, this is what we're doing for police, this is what the police are doing. Fine, that's great. I'm really pleased to hear all of that. But it's at the front end of pastoral care in schools. That's where support needs to be. And when you're a head teacher and you're result driven, you know, that's what makes the school good or bad. You know, I think Ofsted should be more focused on pastoral care and what they do within the schools for the children, for their well-being. So I'm just a little saddened, not telling you off, so don't worry, I'm just a little saddened that it wasn't picked up on in those questions.
Okay, Councillor Tyler.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kenyon. I was going to come back on pastoral care. It's very important that we bring this into the schools, and I think we could put that as one of the points for, you know, one of the things that we could look into, Chair. I'd also like to come back on your your sort of awareness about using videos and messages across all social media.
TikTok.
Yes. But through the Safer Streets funding, we've actually done videos for Time to Change, and they did some very successful videos over the Christmas and New Year period. And RASAC, which is the West Mercia Age of Rape and Sexual Assault, are really behind this, and they are encouraging and spreading that sort of information. And I would raise anybody to have a look at Time to Change.
Can I just come back on that, Ange? I've never seen any of those.
Okay.
You know, I don't know if you remember, I did a little dance a few years ago. I was the mayor, and it was like, I don't know, 500,000 views. Okay, we need to make something that's short, snappy, TikTok, Insta aware, all that sort of stuff. We want to get young people to do it. Why not get people at the schools and say, look, we're going to make this video, who wants to get involved? Then raise awareness of those schools, and they see their friends on it, they share it. That's how you get the message out there. I think, perhaps I haven't seen them, I wish I had, but it sounds to me a little old fashioned, because otherwise it would be out there.
Yeah, take your point, Councillor.
You can dance outside the chip shop.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kenyon. Councillor Norman.
Thank you, Chair. It's just really a question to you. We've had a lot of questions and comments about schools and activities and support and all the rest. We do have Darryl Freeman here. Are we not able to hear a few comments from him about what is actually happening?
If anybody wants to contribute, then please raise your hand.
I don't want to ask a question.
Mr. Freeman, are you? Is this the right time for you to make a contribution? But you know.
Thank you, Chair. I think obviously the range of support from pastoral care throughout the schools is something that's been discussed fairly recently at Children's Scrutiny Committee, including for both mental health and domestic abuse. Probably nothing to add at this point, given the fact that so many speakers have already commented and commented quite extensively, but happy to pick up any specific items later if more information is required, or if this committee would like to make a recommendation to the Children's Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you, Darryl. Right, okay. Right, bear with me. So we have the Community Safety Partnership, and it has, sorry, these are my questions now. 2 strategic priorities. Why are there only 2? I appreciate that these are 2 fundamental issues that need grappling with, but is just having 2 priorities of focus too limited? That's my first question.
Can I go back to one of sorry, Chair, go back to one of those slides?
Yes.
Even though we've identified 2 priorities, we also have to do other priorities as well. So we've listed them there as work towards reducing crime and disorder. So we've got all the other subgroups working that, and they feed into the actual community safety quarterly. Mm-hmm. So even though we've got the 2 strategic priorities, we also have to look at the other matters that come to us as well. So it's not just 2, we have a range of other issues that we have to address.
I appreciate that, but you're selling it, there's 2 priorities.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, is that the wrong approach? Because if you have 2 priorities, then the focus naturally gets put on those. You've listed them separately already, so it's already separate, even though no one, you know, everyone appreciates there are other things to do, but just that. But I'm just thinking, is it a presentational issue, really? Because if you've got all of these other things that you really need to do, should you even be saying you've got 2 priorities? Oh, and a whole host of other things to be doing. Well, you know, why not give them equal space? Because you've got to deal with them equally. But in highlighting them, you know, members of the public could be forgiven for thinking the other things might slip through the net.
I think it's when we hold our quarterly meetings, it is very difficult to bring all the subgroups into to talk about what is being raised and what crime and statistics come through. And I think we give every subgroup the opportunity to do that. And thanks to the analytical team that bring all crime data into the partnership, we can look at and sort of dig down into what is going on. But I think the other things that we don't really do, at the time, is the domestic homicide reviews and the community triggers, because there's a significant amount of work that goes behind the scenes that we have to bring in at times. And I just think, I'm not sort of saying these are the two priorities. We get all the information we can from those priorities, but we also look at the others as well, just importantly. So it is a very time limited meeting, but it's very difficult to get through everything in 2 hours, and I find that very difficult sometimes.
Yeah. Okay, well that's...
Can I bring in?
Oh yes, Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the time when the decision was made around the two priorities, I think there was an element of pragmatism in that what could be best addressed from a multi-agency perspective that will add value and I think the issue of domestic abuse and violence against women and girls, it pervades society, and all agencies have an interest in tackling it. So I think at the time it was these are two issues that we can work together and hopefully have the most impact from working from a partnership perspective. And a number of colleagues from agencies are represented on the Safeguarding Children Board that looks at tackling child exploitation, for example. And so there's a lot of multi-agency partnership working already taking place. So I think there's an element of what can we best use our time for.
Right. Okay, that's helpful to clarify that. Just a small niggle. When it comes to priority 1, violence against women and girls, on the statistic, it lists North Worcestershire, South Worcestershire, Shropshire, but Hereford. Should say Herefordshire, shouldn't it? Yeah. Just want to make that point. So my next question is, when we come to the community safety strategy, it says a strategic assessment will be undertaken every 3 years, while the community safety partnership strategy will be reviewed annually by the board to evaluate progress and ensure that the strategy adapts to changing needs. So there's a built-in mechanism in the strategy for a review of the direction that we're going in. So that's good. But with that in mind, I would really like to ask the panel their honest views on what they think is working well as a partnership and what is not working well. I think it's really important to highlight that and own that in an open forum like this one. Because one of the things I think, certainly in my experience of being on boards, is, especially if you're only meeting quarterly, it's quite a challenge to get the momentum going from the meeting. And if Councillor Tyler, you said it's only a 2-hour meeting, it's very difficult to get back in the saddle, as it were, and focus the minds as a partnership. So I'm interested to know what members feel of the partnership, how they honestly feel about how effective they're being, especially when different agencies have different focus, and is it a challenge to really align that focus when you're dealing with specific tasks? So I welcome anyone to comment on how they feel about that, but it was really interesting to know how well members of the panel feel that the partnership is working. John Campbell.
Just Andrew was just working out which one of them would pick up from their point, and it's not a layering onto your question, because that would be impertinent. I recognise, but one of the interesting bits is what happens when stuff changes, and how ability is a vehicle to adapt to whatever that new change is. And I use the serious violence duty as an example. And linking that with sexual violence, for example, I think is quite pertinent. But that the serious violence duty, I think, is a real opportunity. And the CSP has actually been identified as a vehicle, hasn't it, to make to help make that change happen. And if it's not right at the moment that it is able to adapt and adjust to make best use of things like the development around serious violence duty, what has to change to allow us to maximise those for the residents of Herefordshire? Because I see that's what the duty is about, isn't it? Improving the lot for the people who live in the county.
Yes.
Yep, happy to go first, so to speak. So I think what works well is that the board is a vehicle for us then to discharge actions and work lower down our relevant organisations. And there's lots of work that go on with officers, for example, in fire, working in collaboration with other officers from other of the partners, which works quite well. I do think we need to perhaps get a little bit better data sharing. I know there's work going on in the background anyway, just to kind of see what data, for example, fire can contribute and hook into the bigger piece of work that goes on it feeds in on a quarterly basis. So that's work in progress at the moment, and I'm pleased to say that we're doing what we can to make that happen. But that will give us a richer picture and be able to contribute more information to kind of really kind of laser focus in terms of where the partnership can add most value in the future.
Yes, because thank you for that contribution, because I wanted to tease out the supplementary question that we got, which was just to remind everyone, challenges to overcome undermines the potential value of the strategic analytical report. So the question was, is the scrutiny committee clear about what obstacles there are in achieving better information? And what you're saying, Anna, is it's data and is it that it's obtaining that data or sharing that data that's the problem?
No, I think it's just a case of being clear what the data is that is most valuable, which I think we've got a good picture of, but then it's about just sharing the data, because I think we all collate the data in our own respective areas.
So what is the problem with data sharing? Well, can you give me an example, please?
I can't really give you much detail in terms of examples. For example, we've got a performance analyst team that works in fire. Obviously, we collect certain data that allows us to understand how we're meeting our community risk management plan and our prevention strategy, for example. So it's just aligning those relevant data sets in terms of what the board think would most useful to have.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. Yes. Is it Hope?
Yes. Sorry. I just want to expand on data sharing. That's definitely a problem we experience from an analyst perspective. We always request the data, and I think there's maybe some difficulty in the communication, maybe trying to get together and organise what data the partnership agency might hold and what might be relevant, for example, for safe violence strategy. And I think another important point is evaluation. So I think it's previously mentioned on, are the CSP initiatives working? But as analysts, it would be good for us to evaluate what's working. So it's mentioned about schools educating children. Is this something we can evaluate as analysts in our reports, just to sort of provide that evidence that it is working going forward? So yeah.
Thank you for that. Is there a super data sharing protocol that the community partnership have that is fit for purpose?
Yes, there is, Councillor. The Herefordshire Overarching Information Sharing Protocol applies to the Community Safety Partnership. Yeah. Right. And all members have signed up to that.
Okay.
So that's not an issue.
But it's a question of getting the right data, how best to use that data to then focus the minds on what should be. Right, okay. So, again, just to refresh everyone's minds, it's a question of what's working well and what's not working so well. We've already heard from Anna, which is really helpful, but any more thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just picking up on data and sharing and the quality that comes through, the data quality from the police it's magnificent. It is really detailed as much as we can, and it is a sensitive information which we can't share with the public, and that is a concern for me, because people should know what is going on in their communities. So that is a bit of a critical thing for me as well. But the importance of what is provided and how we can make a difference from all our subgroups coming in and looking at the reports. And when we sort of channel down into the specific areas where there is problems, we can then try and make a difference to understand what's going on in some communities. And whether it is from domestic abuse, whether it's violence against women or girls, whether it's antisocial behaviour, or we can understand what's going from there. So a collective data sharing would give us greater ammunition to sort of look at where we can and push our groups into doing things better. But that's the other frustration point for me, even though if we can get more data, like Hope says, we will be data rich, but it's my other worry is the actual limited resource in the Community Safety Partnership team to be able to efficiently run the HSCSP and give it the credit it's due with Herefordshire community. Thank you.
You say, again, just to query the resource issue, what, if you had more resources, what would be different?
Thank you, Chair. At the moment, we have a very small business unit, and they are spread across the other safeguarding boards, children's and adults, as well as looking after the Community Safety Partnership. There are one single officer having to coordinate all the work. And I think if there was a little bit more resource to this team, then I think we could do more work around the actual priorities and subgroups that we have already identified.
Well, if resource is an issue and it's down to personnel to draw everything together, is there not the opportunity to have contributions of resource in officer time from the different organisations that make up the partnership? Just utilising, smarter working with making more contributions to, because I, in my experience, I know what it's like. You think, oh, we've got a partnership meeting next week, right? Okay, better divert my attention to this for 5 minutes to make sure that this is done, that's done, what's done, and we meet the targets. But I'm just thinking that could these partner organisations, all of them, share in the heavy lifting rather than think there has to be all the actions and the bringing together of all the actions be on the shoulders of very few. Yes.
I totally agree.
Helen Wade, Superintendent.
I might be speaking out of turn, having been in post 1 month and not yet sat on a CSP meeting, but from the conversations to date, my observation is it feels like we do lots of really great initiatives. We talked about the purple spaces and other bits and pieces in schools. And when we've been asked, how do you know it's working? We've perhaps struggled a little bit to answer those questions. And I think your point around actually this should be business as usual would be much more easy. And I don't know whether we do this, so this is why I say I might be speaking out of turn. But actually, if we're going to deliver any sort of initiative, before we start, we should be looking at what are the measures that are going to tell us whether this is effective or not? What are those measures at now? Who owns the data for those measures? And then in 12 months, however long when we're going to evaluate it, those are the measures that are then provided to Hope to say this has gone up, down, whatever, in the right direction, wrong direction. And it feels, perhaps from what I've heard today, that there's a little bit of a gap. And if we were to approach it in that way, I don't think you would need extra resource because it's all information that the partners already hold. It's getting it from the right place into the CSP analyst, which are the resources in place for exactly that purpose.
Yeah. That's really helpful. Any more comments? Good job.
Sounding like a broken record. I know there is some opportunity with the serious violence duty and the funding that will come with it, looking at what coordinating roles, stroke support can be as part of that to aid that journey, that transition from where we are now to where we want to be in that business as usual description. I fund the analytical work for the CSP that the West Mercia are pleased to do on behalf of the partnership. And is it ever enough? No, I don't think it is. There is always more to do, but that clarity from the partnership, with support of the data experts as to what those very simple, clear, small number of measures are to know whether or not you are succeeding, I think is important for motivation for partnerships such as ours. And the other bit I was going to say is it is often we know lots of stuff, as in data or products in different organisations. I don't think there is that sharing of needs assessments and some of the other things that are driving activity as part of that business as usual attitude. Now, there are lots of reasons normally about GDPR and other things, but that sharing why organisations are doing things, I think, is a really healthy relationship to have in a partnership like ours, because we haven't talked about a huge amount this morning. There is a children's problem in Herefordshire, isn't there? So therefore, how do other partners understand what that needs assessment is and the actions that the complementary bits of the wider partnership can do to assist with the challenges in the county. But as I said at the beginning, there is an opportunity, I think, where the serious violence funding might be able to assist with some of that, the coordination bit at the centre. But how long lasting that would be, I don't know. So I would want a clear exit strategy if we are going to try and transition to business as usual.
Right, and any more comments on how the partnership is working? If not, I will hand over to colleagues who want to ask more questions. But the one thing I would just put out there for you to mull over is each partner doing enough to promote community safety partnership in their own right? You know, it's one thing to attend and be a part of that, but what is your organisation individually doing to promote the work of the partnership? So I think that's an important aspect of being a good member, is to make sure that you're doing your part to advertise and to promote what the partnership stands for and what it's trying to achieve. Right, okay, Councillor Durkin and then Councillor Kenyon.
Thank you, Chairman. Moving on to what, well, not moving on, but on to what you've just said. I know that I don't want to say about a Snoopy's charter as it were, but these are serious issues we are discussing here. Similar to the Drink Drive campaign, we've got to make domestic abuse, etc., something that people just don't want to be with, and they will report it. And my question is, are the partners, and in particular I'm looking at the fire, which I know quite well, I'm looking at the CRMP for the fire, and I'm wondering, when your officers go to homes to check in and put in their fire detector, etc., if they see anything other than, as alluded to by Superintendent Wayne there, is there a mechanism for your officers to report this as a potential domestic violence, abuse, whatever? Is there that mechanism with regard to the actual community partnership? And does that, if there is a mechanism, does it go across the entirety of the partnership who have interaction with the public?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really poignant question, really, in terms of the work that we're doing at the moment with the prevention strategy for fire. So yeah, all of our officers, firefighters, support staff, we've got prevention technicians, and in localities we've got prevention engagement officers that do lots of work with schools and families as well. So they're all trained to notice what might not be quite right, for example. I've championed a restructure of the prevention department, and we've increased the resources in the prevention department. So we've now got more signposting and safeguarding officers. So if there are any issues, crews know to report that through to the safeguarding and signposting officers, who are really closely linked into relevant partner agencies. They attend a lot of the subgroup meetings that have been referred to today in terms of the slide pack that you saw. So that those interconnections across fire into other partner agencies. And we regularly refresh the training for firefighters and other support staff. And we're just obviously updating that on an annual basis in terms of what we need to do. I was going to say something else and it's slipped my mind. We've also got prevention champions in every whole time station as well. So they're almost the super users, the champions really. So they are as well another conduit if there's some conversations on the watch, for example, after they've done a home fire safety visit. They know they have got even more information about how to refer and what to refer. So we do take part in a lot of joint working, and it's not just prevention. It might actually be in our protection department where they go into businesses. So again, they might spot things in a business environment which is different to in a residential environment. And again, they've got links in to report and refer those concerns and work in a multi-agency way with the police, for example, in terms of anything that looks untoward in a business environment.
Thank you. I understand the word prevention. Community safety is more what I'm talking about here rather than fire safety prevention. It's the adjunct to it. I mean, I look on your site and it's a household with single parents with a child under 5 years of age. A prime problem, potentially. Do your reports collected together, do they go to the partnership as a norm, to say we have had no incidents reported, or we have 10 suspicions reported, and what happens to that, to those suspicions?
Information such as that gets reported not to the HCSP, but more so the adults or the children's safeguarding boards that we also attend. So we've got officers that specialise in particular different areas of risk or need, and those more detailed information would sit in those other boards that we also sit on as partners really in that sphere.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to Councillor Kenyon, just wanted to make a point. I don't know if Councillor Summers, you wanted to flag up about your point about community, talk community?
There's a couple of things I would like to include in that one. Yeah. Because I don't really understand how we're using social media, etc. I know I was hoping that we would have talk community here today because that it should be involved with this. But also, I noticed when I'm looking at different social media sites for what we're, as a council, are putting on them, we get very picky about where we put them, and we don't duplicate them. Now, you can, in today's world of social media sites, you can put in, for example, Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr. If you put it on one, you can put it on all of them. I'm not sure why we're not using that. For example, LinkedIn is advertising quite a lot for jobs. We're advertising the jobs, but we could be advertising the jobs on all sites, not just LinkedIn, for example. And the same thing here, we need to make better use of social media, and I don't see that happening. I could be wrong, I could be teaching to suck eggs, but we can sync all these social media sites. Why aren't we doing it? Because to put one message in is easier than putting 10 messages or trying to find which is popular right now. If you sync them all, then you're going to put one message to, and that's it. You've got everybody. So I think we need to looking at use social media sites better than we've been looking at them. Thank you.
Anybody want to? Adrian, did you want to?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we need to do some research, and there are colleagues across the Community Safety Partnership that can help us, because I'm sure agencies use social media better than well, we're not doing a great deal for the Community Safety Partnership as a body. I'm just mindful that different demographics, different age groups use different forms of social media, so we need to find out what our young people are using and go from there and use that. Thank you.
Yeah, but abuse goes to all ages,
Yeah.
So you shouldn't be pinpointing.
Yeah.
And if you Google syncing social media sites, there's a whole lot of stuff comes up and some great information that we should, as a council, be taking advantage of. If it's out there, let's make use of it. Anyway, thank you.
Councillor Summers, can I ask you to think about a recommendation there?
Yeah.
The wording of a recommendation.
Go to Google, look on syncing
No,
social sites.
no, about greater use of social media.
Okay, right.
Yeah, because we need some recommendations for the meeting. Councillor Kenyon.
I've been quite a media star, social media star. I'd love to get involved with the council and what they do, because I do understand it. I've got grandchildren, children still very young, I may look very old. And I just want to bang this button one more time. You all nodded in agreement for schools, pastoral care and all the rest of it. You all nodded your heads. Let's look at getting some funding into it. Let's structure it and let's get it good. Also about that, youth organisations, Closed House, do a fantastic job in the city, involved into community centre and the boxing club down there. They do some great stuff down in South Wye. Sometimes feeling a little unsupported, and you mentioned was it Community Matters? Is it Community Matters? What's the one? I always forget it because I feel it's poor, and I'll say that in open public meeting. I feel it's poor. It's not doing what it's set out to do. There's £2 million sat there in that directorate, and I feel it's just swashing around.
Councillor Kenyon, do you mean Talk Community?
Talk Community. So yeah, that's the one I get a bit of a block. We're probably all of a certain age. I don't know if you remember Grange Hill on the TV. I know John will. Grange Hill was two jobs. That was fantastic, and it brought across so many good messages about bullying, about drug use, about all that sort of stuff. It was of its day, and it was fantastic. We need to be looking at something that almost brought up and taught a generation of things, how not to do things. And also invest in coaches and the like, so people are coaching. youth organisations. Let's pay to get these boxing coaches perhaps or something like that. But if there's a fee, running coaches, all these sort of things, let's look at funding those so people can do it. Let's break down barriers and be seen as an organisation that wants to help people and wants to bring people forward. Now, if you indulge me, Chairman, please, just for a moment.
Can we get some questions?
Well, yeah, I'm coming to it. Oh, right, fine. Good question for you, Chairman. What does ANPR stand for? Sorry, ANPR.
I beg your pardon?
ANPR.
Directing at me or the?
Well, yeah, I'm saying
safety.
I was just playing with you. It's a automatic number plate recognition. You're on it. I hope you are. Now, I see these as a great tool for catching people, especially paedophiles that come in and out or may travel around, and general crime. They're fantastic. What's the sort of coverage we've got in this county? Because I'd like to see more of those and less of pop-up speed cameras, and certainly the camera on Belmont Road has been there far too long. I mean, how long is it there for before it just becomes a cash cow? Unless, of course, you're spending that cash on ANPR. So that's something I'd like to do. And just bringing in, just to get some balance here, what are we doing about putting resources into cyclists who break the rules, go through red lights, don't use lights on their bikes at night? So what's happening in and around that? There's no number plates on bicycles. Perhaps that should be a thing of the future, because at least then the police may take a bit of interest in them. So that's the question. And just rural crime, obviously they're coming through our county to get there, so rural crime is on the up. And just while we've got Mr. Campion here, I'd love to know a little bit about rural crime being addressed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, 3 questions there. John Campion to start with.
I'll have a go at 2 of them, Chairman. Firstly, there is a complete system of automatic number plate recognition devices through the county and our surrounding force area and the surrounding forces. So Herefordshire is well served by the technology. For good reason, we don't talk about the location of it, but to reassure you, the technology can be used in fixed sites, mobile sites, in our vehicles and other covert tactics. Even possible in a speed camera device. So the technology is very useful, but it is then what the police do with it, or indeed partners. And I am reassured that we have now a good analytical process within West Mercia Police to convert that very quickly into tactical decisive action if required, or also how it's then used to bring those who are causing harm to justice, or indeed to stop the harm from happening. In relation to rural crime, there isn't such a thing as rural crime. It is crime that happens in the countryside. And I absolutely agree with you. It hasn't always been given the priority it should do. Here in this county, I think there is a good programme of rural crime prevention, for example, i.e. going out and working with rural businesses. What I don't think we are always able to do is have enough police officers visible and accessible in enough of those rural communities because of the challenges of a geographic county such as Herefordshire. But I know the superintendent and the wider system of policing led by the chief constable will ensure that there are ever more resources directed towards that activity, but more importantly, how we support our community to do that. So we're never going to be everywhere, we know that, so therefore how we can be more in the right places more of the time. And I know you represent a city seat, don't you? Not a rural one, but any councillor as a local champion in their communities to assist their local policing team in how to be visible and accessible, please do make sure you encourage them.
Can I come back
with
on
that intel?
Can I come back on that, John? I do represent a city board, but I have got a herd of goats in the countryside, and I've been a victim of crime a number of times, probably about 6 in the last few years. So I do understand it, and the police have been out, and they've been very good. They've used the smart water, and they come out on the goats. Well, yeah, not quite on the goats, but on equipment. But the smart water is fantastic, but that only works if you've got recovered some sort of thing that's been stolen. Unless there's active ways of going around and checking things, perhaps at farmers' markets or something, go around, be out and about, be busy, Ivor Williams trailers are very attractive, and has our little trikes and that sort of stuff. But you did mention my city ward, which are fantastic. Thank you. We do put on events in my city ward, and when asked by community support officers, I always feel they're the clues in the question. They're there to support the community. When I requested some community support for an event I put on, which 3,000 people attended, I was told they were too busy, which for me, it kind of got my goat. There we are, goats again. So I felt that was sad. That was a good opportunity in years gone by. We've sent police there, the fire service have turned up, and it's a great way of showing yourselves up, and not showing yourselves up, so you always do a great job, but being there and showing off what you do. So I was saddened by that, and I just wanted to get that in. So thank you for your indulgence.
Okay. Yes.
We have picked up, sorry, just I don't know whether the superintendent was about to reach for the issue that was just raised by Councillor Kennan. I know you've raised it previously in other forums, and I know I think it was in front of the Chief Constable, but I would have to triple check.
Yeah, it was.
And at the time, I know you had an answer, and I agree with you on the face of it that it is disappointing there wasn't that opportunity. But West Mercia Police, 10,000 calls for service a week, 4,500 officers and staff. And the intent is that they are going to be where they need to be all the time, but it's not the lived reality. And I remember the question at the time. I know there is reflectful learning about wanting to do better all of the time, but it is just that mindfulness that sometimes not all great decisions are made, but sometimes the ability for the police to do what we want them to do isn't always there. But I know you had the commitment at the time from the chief that there would be, the resource if we have again. But lastly, it was really lovely to hear the recognition of the role of the PCSO in our community. You celebrated 20 years of PCSOs in West Mercia in this last week, and I think we're an integral part of the public face of policing here in the county.
Sorry, John, just to update you, we did have another event and we didn't get this.
These were consistent.
I won't repeat what Mr. Campion said in respect of availability of PTSAs, because it's exactly what I would have said, but please keep asking, because if you don't ask, you're definitely not going to get that support. Just back to your earlier point in relation to cyclists, I can't tell you off the top of my head now how many cyclists have been given a ticket or some other intervention in respect of breaking the rules of the road. Obviously, for us to do it out and about, we've got to see it happen, we've got to have a police officer in the right place at the right time. The other means by which that could be tackled is through Operation Snap, which is the initiative that's been in place for some years now, where you can send dashcam footage of road traffic offences in electronically, and that will be dealt with. Whether we deal with cyclists through that, I would imagine we would if they were reported. I don't know what the report rate looks like for that, so I'm afraid I can't answer that question.
Thank you for that answer. I'd just like to say I thought Snap was an 80s band and quite a bit of rhythm to it. It might have even been a dancer, I don't know. But a couple of things I'd like to see, if there are people riding bikes with their mates, the lights cost nothing. Have a few in the boot and just say, look, here we go, get them on. Take the name, you make your game, you're going to get a ticket. That's the sort of policing that's good, and they might actually get them to readdress what they're doing. Because when you drive, especially there's very low lights or street lighting in Herefordshire, and it's for their own good. No motorist wants to kill a cyclist, despite what you read on Twitter and all the rest of it, Jeremy Clarkson, what he says. No one wants to, but we have to see.
And we do a community event. I appreciate we haven't been able to come to yours, so it's a bit rich of me to say this, but we do things like bike marking, and we bring lights and fluorescent things and all that kind of stuff in support of.
One day, I look forward to it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for those answers. Going back to the question raised by the member of the public earlier, thank you very much, regarding plans for the rural policy of safer streets, etc. It was mentioned in the current plan, it's mentioned in context, but only on 3 occasions, and nothing to do with safety in the streets. Well, how advanced are the thoughts or practicalities of the upcoming policy with regard to extending the safer streets into the rurality and market towns?
Thank you, Councillor Dunphy, for your question. I think this is very early days for us in terms of our strategy coming forward, which we're looking to adopt next month. And all I can say is that we'll go forward with it and report him back.
And that's a good answer, Madam Watson. Thank you very much.
Okay, two quick questions. Councillor Kenyon mentioned talk community, and I know Councillor Summers was thinking about talk community, has raised that as an issue with me. We don't have the cabinet member for community wellbeing, but we do have Hilary Hall as the corporate director. I suppose the question for the panel would be, and I'll ask Hilary Hall directly, are we using the talk community hub system well enough to promote the priorities of the community safety partnership? Oh right, sorry, I thought that was Councillor Crockett's. All right, okay. It's been switched round. Well, there we are. Well, I would like to hear from Hilary Hall if that's possible, but let's go to see now that I've asked her. And if I can come to you then, Councillor Tyler, afterwards.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I believe that we are, but on the back of the discussion this morning, that I will ensure that there's a greater focus of that through the hubs, picking up the comments from this morning.
Thank you. Councillor Tyler?
Yes, I'm sort of at the lead on talk communities in my portfolio. We have just allocated the 2 million that was supposed to do the super hubs, but we've made a recommendation now that that will be supported by enhancing the existing hubs in the communities. And as Hilary has just said, that we will sort of look at all the community hubs, how we can support them, and how we can look at different crime and disorder in our communities, and how we can influence and bring our community safety partnership into giving some information as well. So I'd like to do some like leaflets and things like that. We can sort of enhance our presence in those communities.
Thank you. Councillor David.
Thank you. Looking at appendix, I think it's 8. Bear with me a second. I'll just find it. Yeah, I think it's appendix 8. There is a chart that talks about the attendances at the by key agencies, and I note that the Health ICB attend every 6 months. Is that something that needs to be reflected or pages? Sorry, Chairman. It's page 4. It talks about HCS people manning meeting attendance by key agencies. I think the name's in the title, key agency.
Sorry, page 4 of what?
Appendix A.
Yes, but what page of the?
I think it's page 4, Chair. It comes after other representatives.
Oh, right, page 24 of the agenda.
24 of the agenda.
Thank you. Yeah, Health ICB have attended twice in a year. And I wonder if that's frequent enough. Do they have good reasons for not attending? Because I see that promotion service have missed one and the PCC has missed one, which is fine, these things happen, but it seems to be a consistency in missing.
Where are they today?
Councillor Tyler?
Actually, the ICB, he said John Barnes is here. He may want to answer that question.
Mr. Barnes?
Yes, thank you. I didn't go into post till April, so I think the March meeting was my predecessor, Hazel Braund, and I did miss one meeting, but attended the others, and as you say, I'm here today. So no intention to miss meetings, just unfortunately that clashed with something else, that September meeting.
Meetings always clash. Right. Right, okay. Councillor Summers, then Councillor Kenyon.
Okay, I'm just going to bother her police friends here a little bit. I've had some issues in my ward, a lot of issues over the past 7 years about getting PCOs, or I'm not sure the terms are used anymore.
PCSOs.
What they said. To visit or get in touch with my parish councils, and now community groups, which are becoming actually quite strong in the ward. I know for a fact that, for example, Home Lacey's had two supposed to come, and each time they've not come and didn't send an apology. So I think through this, Councillor Tyler, maybe we can work with the PCLOs?
PCSOs.
Okay. To start communicating with their parish councils. Even, I notice that they're always on the agenda, but there's never a report. And if they just sent, I have requested this in writing, by the way, that if they just sent a report to the parish councils about what's going on in the area, it would be a great help. But a lot of my parishes feel left alone, and they're tired of fighting it. So perhaps we can reorganize maybe after the election, that, and that's what I've suggested at the moment, that after the election, you look at this again and try and make it a regular feature that parish councils get reports on what's happening in their areas. Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman, to be difficult. The purpose of this agenda item isn't to scrutinise the police. That's a matter for for myself as Commissioner and the Police and Crime Panel to hold me to account. But to address the Councillor's point, there is a clear commitment out there for West Mercia Police to be engaged with parish council meetings, which I know happens. And if it isn't happening consistently, happily pick something directly up with the councillor.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Kenyon, and then I've got a question to raise.
Yeah, thank you. It was just to be addressed at Councillor Tyler when she was chatting away. I was listening intently, and as you know, you said that 2 million now has been reassigned. It was swashing around, so perhaps some can be swashed my way. Well, not my way in particular, but as chairman of Hinton Community Centre, we've asked repeatedly to get the roof fixed over our heads. We do a fantastic job. Well, in fact, Vince does. It's not me at all. I'm just a gobshite that makes the noise to find funding.
Chairman.
Yeah. Can you refrain from using those?
Oh, yeah, okay. I do apologise for using that word.
Just not appropriate.
I was describing myself. I do apologise.
Yes, that may well be, but please can we...
So what I'm asking then is, in an open public meeting, is that perhaps we can look at funding, fixing the roof, so we can keep the thousands of children and adults that come to the centre coming along. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kenyon. I will take your comments away and we will just discuss that separately with the top community team. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Summers raised a point about parish councils and the role of parish councils. And those councillors who know me, I always set great store by communicating with parish councils, because I think they're the unsung heroes of community representation, and spend many an hour in many a village hall or community hall worrying about their communities and knowing how best to serve them. So the question for the Community Safety Partnership is, do members think that they are engaging with parish councils in a most effective way? Could that relationship be improved upon? And I noticed from the item 18 in the in the strategic, I'll tell you your title. I'll get the right page. It's your strategy. It's talking about gathering information. And it says resources are not available to complete partnership surveys and information gathering to gain the views of Herefordshire people on how they feel safe and what concerns them most. So how is this partnership going to improve in the way that it learns what people are most concerned about? And corollary to that is obviously the point I was making about, are we doing enough to engage with parish councils to promote the strategies and priorities of the partnership? Thank you. Paul Middleton, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Whilst Angie's just looking at perhaps what we're doing, I spend quite a lot of time actually visiting parish councils across Herefordshire and Worcestershire to talk through issues of community policing, and I always raise the question of the Community Safety Partnership, and I must say they don't know anything about it. I can say that broadly. People may have seen something somewhere in a paper, and if a councillor is there they may have actually been involved. But it does strike me that there is a lack of communication to that group, and I'm sure there's lack of communication to other groups outside the democratic process.
Okay then, thank you for that, Paul. That's a really helpful observation that I think gives this committee a good steer on what one of our recommendations would be, which would be one of the initiatives that the Community Partnership will undertake to raise its profile in community liaison and greater promotion. Because if you're trying to promote a message as a partnership, but then the existence of the partnership in the wider community is not well understood, then it seems to undermine the good work that's being carried out. So that would be one of the recommendations. So with that in...
Can I say thank you to that, please, to both of you?
Okay, yeah, so thank you. So I think, unless there are any more questions at this stage, I'm conscious of the time and the fact that we've got another item on the agenda. So can I hand over to Mr. Coleman just to focus our minds on what the types of recommendations and steers that this committee has distilled from its questions so far?
Do you want me to share them?
Yes, please.
Okay, so there's a, excuse me. So I think that there's been a number of actions which I think speak to Mr. Campion's point earlier about the committee feeling reassured that the resources that are deployed are serving the purposes as well as they can be. And then some recommendations from the committee to seek further information or that reassurance or new information. Bear with me while I just get it on the screen. So one of the first actions that I picked up was that the Crime and Safety Partnership to prevent evidence back on the healthy, beg your pardon, evidence gathered on the healthy relationships education and its measurable impact on reducing domestic abuse, peer-on-peer and violence against women and girls in our younger people. Another action, CSP to present the evidence of the DRIVE campaign in relation to prevention of controlling and coercive behaviours, mental abuse related crimes. A recommendation which originated, I think, from Councillor Kenyon in relation to the CSP explore the current role of pastoral care within educational settings in enabling young people, their peers, to recognise, record and report or refer abuse in all of its forms. Further to actions, CSP to explain how its priorities are changing as a result of new funding and interventions such as the serious violence duty and resulting strategy. CSP to explain where improvements to sharing of data is enabling clearer understanding of trends and measures and how they influence operational practice. A further recommendation, CSP to utilise wider use of social media and research commonly used channels used by differing cohorts of society to promote key messaging, sources of help and support. And then two recommendations, I'm not sure I've formulated them as clearly as you would have liked, committee, but I'll put them up there just as they are. So CSP to approach talk communities with a view to sharing data and to strengthen their network for communicating sources of help, sources of support and help. And then a final recommendation, which I was just in the process of penning when I put these up on the screen, Chairman. So recommendation is to respond to the committee's request to broaden and strengthen it, being CSP's reach within the community.
And can I put a special mention of parish councils in outreach to parish councils, greater communication? Councillor Durkin and then Councillor Kenyon.
Thank you, Chairman. Amongst my questions, I did mention education as well, education department, with regard to schools. Will we go back to the penultimate one? Oh, sorry.
So got it there with regards to the pastoral care.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Kenyon.
Thank you, Chairman. I did formally sit on another children's Scrutiny committee, And at that time, about six months ago, I mentioned about actually doing a scrutiny committee in and around pastoral care in schools. And it fell off deaf ears, to be fair, the chairman of that. I was quite disappointed. However, I know we've only got a few months, but I would like to suggest that we set up a scrutiny committee before the May elections, or certainly we recommend a separate scrutiny committee, a committee to investigate it, councillors involved, done after the elections.
I think, Councillor Kenyon, that would be the remit of the Children's Scrutiny Committee. So, I mean, we're talking about it, mentioning it now, because
can we recommend it to them?
Absolutely, yes. If they've got room, if they've got room in the timetable, we can recommend it for them to consider. But we're talking about it because we're addressing community safety. But if it was a one-off item specifically on that, that would be for children's scrutiny.
I did that 6 months ago.
Well, I'm afraid to have to take it up with them, but we can make a recommendation. Councillor Summers.
Just on social 6, I think we should put the word synchronising on the social media, because we need to synchronise all of them. If you synchronise them, then you're going to get to everyone rather than individual ones. We've gone over using social media in the past, but we never talked about synchronising, so that's a whole new direction. And I think the word synchronise says more than what I'm saying.
Okay, add the word synchronise. Right. Okay. Does this committee members, Councillor Norman attending virtually, do we have any more questions for the Community Safety Partnership? We've had quite a lot of questions at them today, and we've had some really interesting and helpful answers. Councillor Tyler.
Yes, thank you, Jake. Can we make further recommendation action, if that's possible?
Yes, you can.
We haven't mentioned about the Safer Street funding and looking how further we could develop the funding to going into rural areas.
Yes.
So we can sort of further, look at those areas and seek further funding for it to see how we can explore options to move into the rural communities.
Okay.
Because that's what was mentioned. Why is
yes.
it how
That's right. Yeah. Can we incorporate that, John? John Capian.
If I knew we were allowed to offer recommendations, I'd have chipped in earlier, and it supports one Councillor Tyler's just made. So, as Councillor Durkin will know, in my most recent budget for the next financial year, I've included £2 million around some work that we've done in Telford previously called Safer Communities, which is kind of a Safer Street Plus or Safer Street follow-on programme, which is working with communities, leading with the upper-tier council and parish councils around that kind of environmental community-based activity. So Herefordshire, that means there will be 250k a year the next 2 financial years. I know some very initial conversations have been had with the chief exec here, but it needs turning into a project. So it was how you layer into your recommendation there about how we explore funding streams to further some of these community safety priorities, and with that then to ensure that it's the whole county rather than just necessarily the county city or indeed some of our urban communities and broad all communities.
So can we incorporate that?
Live editing.
Sorry, Mr. Campion, would you mind just repeating how you describe that?
So it is. It's not just a safer. So it's augment, I think, to the Safer Streets work. It's how you explore new funding streams such as mine to further the priorities of the Community Safety Partnership.
Thank you. And lastly, my challenge, I would just like to add, can the Community Safety Partnership explore innovative ways of working so that initiatives are not necessarily tied to funding of initiatives? So working smarter rather than
Chair.
Yes, Councillor.
Would you mind if I just ask for one more thing? It's something I've been asking for some time. I have talked to police in the past about it, and I think there was funding available some time ago, but I wasn't able to get a wall. But I would like to see a graffiti wall in Herefordshire somewhere, or 2 graffiti walls, because there are young people, right now they're just spraying paint everywhere, but if they had a graffiti wall, they'd maybe monitor themselves and give them something else to, anyway.
But your house.
Yeah, I would go for it, quite frankly. But anyway, just throw that one in.
Okay,
For no reason.
I don't perhaps think it would probably be appropriate as a recommendation, but I think.
No, but it's something you can think about, Councillor Tyler. If
We've
something
looked at
comes
it,
up.
we've looked at doing this in the past. At the moment, they just used to be tea green boxes, don't they? They seem happy with it.
Okay, right, so we've formulated our recommendations, and only those present in the room of the committee can vote on those recommendations, but are we happy to take a position? I will propose from the chair. Councillor Kenyon's going to second it. All in favour of those recommendations? Right, thank you very much. Well, just that concludes this item on the agenda. I would just like to thank all of the Community Safety Partnership members for attending this meeting and contributing and giving us a real flavour of the challenges and what needs to be addressed and taken forward. It's a really important initiative, great way of getting all of those key partners together, and we wish you well, and thank you for helping us put forward our recommendations, and it would be very good for this committee in its new form after May to pursue and continue to see how the partnership is working. So thank you for your contributions. I'm going to move now. We have a 15-minute recess.
And we're live again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just to confirm that this is the Connected Community Scrutiny Committee, and we've just had a 15-minute break, and we were discussing the Community Safety Partnership and scrutinising its function and performance, and if you would like to see more about that part of the meeting, it's recorded on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel. But so we now come to item 8, which is to discuss the Public Realm Services future operating model. This has come to our scrutiny committee before 2 meetings ago, and contributions were made by Cabinet member responsible, John Harrington, and officers who will introduce themselves when they come in to speak. And so we will get an update as to how things are going, where we are at, and councillors will be able to ask their questions. Councillor Harvey has had to leave the meeting virtually, but we're joined now by Councillor Gemma Davis. So you're very welcome. And we still have our committee member, Felicity Norman, who's part of this committee and sitting there patiently waiting to ask her questions. But to kick off, we'll go to Councillor John Harrington.
Going to declare an interest.
Oh, right, yes. Councillor Kenyon.
Chairman, I'd like to non-pecuniary interest in that occasionally I drive a gully Thacker drain clearer for a company that a subcontractor Belfast BT. It's non-pecuniary.
Okay, thank you for declaring that interest. Councillor Harrington.
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you, members. Yes, we're here to talk about where we are with looking at the future model of the public realm contract. I've got Alex Deans, who's the interim programme director with us, and also Mark Averill, who's interim service director for Highways and Waste. So in sort of rough rounded terms that a cabinet member understands, what we are looking at is how we want the public realm contract to work going forward. When we came in as administration, obviously we had a contract which was started in 2013, which was a model of contract which was quite client thin, as they call it. So in other words, the contractor, subcontractor partner, Balfour Beatty, had taken on quite a lot of the responsibility of the council, not simply in just delivering an annual plan, but actually in terms of technical staff and highway staff, and actually they deliver the annual plan, they construct the annual plan themselves. They have their own inspectors as well who inspect the highways and footways for defects, which feeds back in reports into the way that we manage the contract. So we were looking at, is this the best way to use the service? Is this the best model that we had? We also at the time were having some work done by PwC, which Councillors Harvey and Davies in association liaison with the Section 151 office and others were looking at whether or not we could demonstrate value for money within the contract, whether any issues in how the contract was managed, or was there any particular issue with the contract itself. And I think the work that PricewaterhouseCoopers did, which is now closed out, came back and said actually the contract was okay. It was a good contract in many ways. That Balfours were, a good company, civil company. There's neither better or worse than many others, although we have a good relationship with them. But the issue was that we may not necessarily on the council side be in a position to monitor that contract in the way that we would like to achieve or to demonstrate that we did have confidence in value for money and other issues. So we looked at various different things that we could do, right from insourcing all the services to continuing with the current model as it is. And after quite a lot of discussion with between the cabinet members and also with members from different political parties on the liaison group, we've taken a view. I suppose it's fair to say we've taken the view that we'd like to concentrate on the option 5, which is in a sense using the current model but taking technical staff back in house, bringing the technical capacity of the council back in house to give us the assurance that we feel the contract we're able to monitor the contract effectively, and that would include things like bridge road engineers, people inspecting our roads. And critically, ideally, we'd be looking to make the annual plan ourselves and ask our partners to deliver it for us, as they have been doing. And essentially, that's the gist of it. I mean, we did look at, as I said, all the different options, including bringing things back in-house. And through the questions, I'm sure we can get into some of those details. I don't think anyone needs to say anything else, do they? No, and we can go straight to it if you like.
Thank you, Councillor Harrington. John, I'll go straight to the key question. If you're taking officers in-house to have that expertise and service in-house, what's the cost difference?
That's a very good question. And I've been assured by Alex, and I'm sure will give us a bit more detail, that we would like to make that as cost neutral as possible, and apparently it is possible within reason to make it cost neutral. So Alex, do you want to just sort of see what we're at least aiming for?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I'm Alex Deans. I'm an interim. So I'm a contract specialist. I've been working with Herefordshire for about 6 months now, advising on the way forward with the public realm services. In terms of costs, there's a slight increase of cost for those staff coming back in. It's quite small, and we think by some other efficiencies and bringing in new IT improvements, etc., in the contract, that we can mitigate those costs and end up with the service being cost neutral. So that's what we'll be looking to do.
So it's more of a setup cost rather than an operational cost, being the setup cost being more, but from then on, it would be more of a cost neutral situation.
Yeah, there'll be an initial cost to implement the changes. So the plan is to work that through in this calendar year in 2023, work out that implementation cost, but the long-term position will be that the service is aiming to be cost neutral, but we need to work that through. We've done some indicative costs, but we need to work it through in detail and put a sort of full business case together to support that proposal.
And are we talking, when you say costs, are we talking £250 or are we talking 250,000, or what any idea of ballpark figures?
We need to work it through. That the initial implementation cost could be in the region of up to around £1 million, which would be delivered over a 2-year period. So we need to look how we fund that, and that would give us. But then the service cost, we're looking to deliver that on a cost neutral basis, and obviously look for any further savings and efficiencies that we can, and we work that through.
Mark,
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to that, so
I think it's important to understand that even if we weren't going out or looking to remodel what we deliver the contract, we'd still need to have some of those contract development costs anyway, in terms of systems, in terms of processes, just to make sure that we aren't in the year 2015, but we're actually moving towards the year 2022 and onwards. So that investment's required anyway.
Yeah, 2023.
2024, 2025.
Okay, Councillor Durkin and then Councillor Kenyon.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry to revisit some of this, Councillor Harrington. Last April, traffic management was taken back in-house, and I don't believe it could be said it functioned appropriately, and I'm not sure it's still functioning. Could you tell me what lessons were learned from that, removing resources into house?
No, I can answer that. Thank you, Councillor Durkin. I don't think that traffic management coming in-house has worked quite well. You may be referring particularly to SIDS, are you?
No, I was thinking back to the April on the first 2 weeks where one retired and one resigned, leaving the cost of one, and I still get complaints from my parish councils that they're not getting their answers quick enough, including SIDS. You're quite right there, but there are other elements, and it's just about the changeover, which is traumatic anyway for anybody. It's the changeover, and I'm not sure whether it actually functioned the way you thought it was going to do. But my comment was, have you learned from this?
Okay, thank you. No, I think the major issue was around the SIDS, and I think there was some confusion about whether or not we as a council, as traffic management, would continue renting SIDS, particularly because we had Balfours who used to rent them. We're prepared to support people using them but not rent them. But you were right, there was issues in getting back to people and then also deciding, well, who was responsible, because some people had gone through the community commissioning with Balfours and some were coming to us. No, there were issues, particularly around SIDS. And you're right about communications, and there was staff movement, and unfortunately when you take an opportunity to bring a service in-house or do something different, people take that opportunity to retire. We had many people close to retirement age. I think TM functions well at the moment, Proud doesn't function as well, I would say, but TM is functioning well at the moment, having learned those lessons. And I'll just get the detail on whether we're up to capacity. But you're right that lessons have been learned, and I suppose that's one of the reasons why the period for us to implement a change of model here would probably be, well, it's being suggested as April 2025, and I initially pushed back against that and said, well, that's a long time, officers and public realm folks all seem to want an age to do things, and I think they've reassured me or explained to me that to do things correctly, to make sure that we do not have any teething problems like we might have done, that we need to do that, so that has been taken on board.
Thank you. In a way, you just follow on, Chairman. But agenda number 36, it talks about there are currently in the region 80 technical staff provided with the contract to deliver the following services. Are they the ones that you're proposing to come in-house? Now, I suspect going towards 2025, there will be a variation to that 80. Are these the main areas of expertise that the council, your administration, are looking to bring in-house to provide, hopefully, a better service for the people of Herefordshire?
We certainly aim to bring it in-house for that ambition, and not to say that it hasn't necessarily worked well as being with our contractor, but we haven't had the control or the certainty that we would like to be able to monitor the contract. So yes, we'd be looking at bringing, for example, bridge engineers, highways engineers, inspectors into Herefordshire Council employ, so that we could, we would always be able to say, well, we have our own contractors, our own workers' eyes across the contract.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kenyon.
Thank you, Chairman. I just thought I'd come in with a couple and then let some other people speak. Right at the beginning of your opening talk, John, you mentioned potholes. And that is, for most people, a thing. Don't even fix our potholes, they're empty job-ins. And that's what I think the council do and does. There's a lot more than that. I would like to see people taking ownership of potholes, and because if you've got a pothole outside your drop outside on the road outside, you can report it. but the way of reporting is a bit long-winded and a bit of a faff. So I think we need to get that message out there, and perhaps something like they do on advertising. Again, we spoke earlier about TikTok, getting messages out to people, young and old. We could do an advert. It could be "Fix my hole," the council fix my pothole, you know, and have someone dancing around outside a pothole. Things like that might be daft, might be stupid, but get the message across that anybody can report a pothole. Because once we know about them, we can get them fixed. And yeah, we need to know they're on the system to get them done. So that's a little bit about ownership and people of Herefordshire actually taking ownership of these potholes. We'll just move on a little bit. Assets, and I read recently that we're going to be spending 1.4 million on gritters. Who will actually own that asset? Will the council own the asset, or will Balfour's own the asset? Because that's quite important to know. And there's some excellent work that's done by Balfour BT, and the council do some awful good work as well. But sometimes there's a mismatch. Perhaps better labelling on vehicles of who, what we are would be a better thing. Whether it's Balfour BT or it's Herefordshire Council, I think we need to have a look around how these vehicles are signed up, because it does make a difference when people are looking at things like that. Councillor Durkin brought up a fantastic point: renting. Notorious for renting equipment, often where they've rented it for 6 months, you could have actually bought the thing. So that was happening a long time ago, and if it's still happening, that really does need to be addressed, because once you bought it, you own it, and it's your asset. If you're renting it, exactly what it is, you rent it. I do understand they rent diggers regularly. Why aren't we buying these diggers that are on the roads doing digging and that sort of stuff? So I'd like to know a little bit more in and around that. That's more operational than what we're talking about today, but I thought it was a good arena to bring those up. So renting, what are they renting? What are they spending on renting? Because ultimately, we're paying for it. And if we're not renting, we can get more bang for our bucks. What are the businesses have been spoken to about potentially looking as to if they would like to take this contract on? Have we spoke to anybody else in the marketplace? I know we've done assessments, this, that, and the rest of it, and I see the tables, I read through with some interest. But the long and short of it is we're looking at reassigning this contract for a number of years. 7 years, the option on 9, is that correct?
Up to 2033.
Yeah, sorry, 2033, so it's 10 years, yeah. So we're doing this work now, and how much have we spoken to other companies? That's the thing. I know we've looked at pulling things out and pulling things around and that sort of stuff, but I don't think we've looked at other businesses potentially coming in and doing a better job for a better price. I mean, so that's my question.
Well, I'll start and then you can come in, Alex, that'll be very helpful. So working backwards, Jim, on Councillor Kenyon, on your sort of 4 or 5 questions, we're at the point of deciding, you know, what to do in relation to this. So it's not at a point where we're talking to other people, because we need to decide whether or not we want to bring things in-house or whether or not we want to look at another operator. However, setting that, Alex will give some indication that we have been doing some sort of soft testing in a sense. In the sense to equipment, we normally, if we're buying equipment, capital equipment, we normally own it as Herefordshire Council, but obviously there are other arrangements, but I can ask Mark to give a bit more detail on that. And in relation to potholes, I completely agree. I mean, the more people report potholes, the better. People seem to, unfortunately, be under a kind of misunderstanding that if, for example, they hit a pothole, that a claim is automatically, guaranteed. And unfortunately, the responsibilities we have as a local authority come down to how we react to things once they've been reported. So if they're not reported, and the first time someone hits it is the first time its sense has been reported, then that means that it's difficult to do things properly. So I would always encourage people to report things like potholes. You're quite right. It's also important to remember that we had about £50 million a year in 2011 to deal with things like potholes. We've got about 6 now, so it's very, very difficult. But that said, we can do things better. Do you want to just come in, Alex, on the solid mark testing of other?
Yeah, thank you. Regarding the potholes and ownership, just generally in terms of the way forward in the new model, we are looking at aligning with the council's corporate digital enhancements, so enhancing that digital experience for customers. So obviously moving towards different accounts, Facebook, TikTok and all this type of more modern way of going forward. So that's all lined up to modernise the service with new IT to operate more efficiently. The question around the assets, in terms of the gritters, I understand the gritters are currently owned by the council. It's a mixed approach, so some of the vehicles are owned by the council, some are owned by Balfour Beatty. In terms of the longer way forward, we are looking at part of the carbon net zero by 2030, so there would be a modernisation of fleet. We'd be looking to go electric where we can, put electric charging points and depots, and obviously work that through with Balfour Beatty to look who's best placed to procure the fleet, whether it be the council or Balfour Beatty. So that's something that needs to be worked through.
I'll just come in on that. I do know that a little while ago, Balfour Beatty were looked at putting a charging point in down by the Victoria Bridge, and they were quoting £24,000. When now someone said they could do it for about £4,000. So there are things out there that we need to make sure we look at long and hard, and especially when it comes to putting things in, assets into places.
I think that's why with this longer leading programme, we've got time to work these things through, and obviously wherever we can do it in the most efficient way, whether that be the council procuring it or the contractor, we can work that through. We've also are proposing to rebrand the new service, which was one of the points you mentioned. So when the service goes live, it will be very much more Herefordshire focused as a service, and obviously we've got time to work that up. In terms of speaking to other companies, I mean, there would be appetite there. If you went out to procure a similar type of service to what we are currently getting provided through Balfour Beatty, you would end up with one of the major tier 1 providers. But to do that, you would have to go through a full procurement exercise where you could be looking up to a couple of £1 million to run that process. And then would you be getting a lot of the staff, the workers would transfer to that new organisation. So we've looked at that. We didn't feel that was going to offer the council value for money. If you went down to smaller packages of works, then there's some efficiencies there. But depending on how you split that service up and go out to smaller companies, I'm sure there would be appetite. But we've worked that through in terms of the option appraisal, which is in the report. And in terms of value for money and reducing risk to the council, we felt the way forward was shown to be the most efficient way for the council, or the way the council should proceed, which is all mapped out in the options appraisal. I'm not sure in the ins and outs of the rating of the plans. You would assume as a competent contractor they would be looking at that in an efficient way of how they're doing that, but we'd have to, if there's a specific there.
I think often if they spend someone else's money, it's not. If I spend the council's money, it's better than I spend my own, that's for sure.
Okay, yes, Mark.
Sorry, so Councillor Ken, you referenced a possibility of getting something out there, advertising for potholes. All in favour of that. We need to be careful we don't become a lampooned authority. So there are a number of different videos on the web, if you look, and they've become a bit of a joke in the public's eyes as to what we're going to do. I'll speak to you later, and I'll show you at least one that I can reference for you.
Can I cut in there? Why had they become a joke?
It's because the public see us as effectively tend to teach them to suck eggs. That's what it's like. It's almost the public. We don't need to know this. You've told. We don't need to know.
Okay, but is it the performance of getting the potholes filled, or is it the viewpoint of the council with this?
It's the medium itself. The medium itself lends itself to almost that trolling of stuff that comes through. So you end up with a group of people that all they want to do is criticise. And no matter what good work you've done, you'll get the criticisms, and people then won't necessarily go to it who want good information. They'll see it as a lampoon site that we don't need to go and look at.
Okay, sorry, Chair. Yeah. I think there was a lot of discussion to have there.
Yeah, I think as you say, Councillor Durkin, we can be better on making sure that information's out there. We don't need people dancing and potholes scrapping like myself. We just maybe just be more clear about, if you don't report this, unfortunately it won't be recorded as quickly as it should be and won't get repaired.
Exactly.
We can't improve on that, because those are sort of bits of information that people don't realise, that if it's not reported, it really means that the council is not as accountable as if it's reported. So we can get that.
Because after all, it's just a channel for reporting.
Yeah, I think the desire sometimes, that commonwealths feel they have to kind of dress things up a little bit. We don't, we can be a bit more simple.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Regarding assets, so Winterfleet is sometimes owned by council, sometimes we let the providers own the fleet. Depends on the model that's been historically managed by an authority. With regards to normal work vehicles, we'll rely on our tier 1 contractor as part of the bidding process. When we've got those costs baked in, we can refer them back to the bid. Well, actually, you said you'd fix a pothole for X pounds. That was using this piece of kit, these 2 people, these bits of plant and equipment. You said you're going to rent them for this price. So we just hold them back to those prices, Jim. So it's not about making sure that we necessarily own, because that's the tier 1 contractor's choice as to what he goes and does. If we insist that they own them, then that changes potentially their whole business model for the company, and that's not something that many companies will want to do, change their business model for how they operate for a single contract.
But let me just say on the point on that is if we're paying for something as a council, so in other words, if we think gritters are needed and we're paying for them, they're ours.
Yeah.
If Balfours want to use the money that we give them for the entire contract to purchase or to do things with vehicles to function from their side of the contract, that's different. But the majority of things like gritters are owned by us.
And that's it, I think.
Yeah. Okay, we've got, next question is Councillor Summers, but Councillor Davis put her hand up and I think she wanted to respond about the contractual point. That's just me guessing, assuming, but over to you, Councillor Davis.
Yeah, it's a 3-pronged cabinet member decision, this one. So obviously it's important when things are raised around contracts. And just coming back to Councillor Kenyon's point, there's 2 things here, I guess. One of them is we'll focus on that contractual part and about competitive dialogue. It's part and parcel of council policy now. Sorry, my bird has decided to attack my laptop. It's part and parcel of the council's business now to enter into competitive dialogue and having those engaging conversations with organisations to say, look, are you interested? If you've got a specific lot, are you interested in that? And that's working really well with waste services, for example. So just for an assurance there, the way that we procure contracts now is entering into that kind of dialogue and really thinking about how can we break down the contract if we need to get best value for the residents of Herefordshire. And I think that that's a really important thing. I think it's also really important to think of it as not values in pounds as well, remembering that some of our large contracts, up to 12% of them, can be based around the social value. So offering opportunities to caregivers to enter into engineering and such like would have huge benefits, especially if they're looked after children. So there are some really important things to consider there when we're talking about value, not least on top of that, the quality and the environmental impact that certain organisations may offer us. So big organisations like BBLP do lots of innovative work to reduce carbon. So we need to think about that, about what they can offer on top of the services that they provide, so that value added. The other part of it is I just wanted to talk about the fleet, and what I wanted to give firstly, Councillor Kenyon, was an assurance that the information that you just asked for, happy to get that in a written answer for you, because you're asking about the assets that we own, and I think it's really important that we're open and transparent about that. So we'll make sure that the committee obtains that information. So happy for that to happen. But just want to connect it again to the waste contract, whereby we are now procuring the fleet vehicles, because we know from our competitive dialogue and our conversations with other local authorities that sometimes the buying power of the council means that other organisations that maybe could come in to contracts, who couldn't possibly dream of doing it because they couldn't buy a big fleet, would come in for that contract instead. So for me, one of the key parts around this is offering that flexibility from a council's perspective. Is it right that we own it? Is it right that the other organisations owns it? Is it right about rental charges, etc.? And all of that is part of the next phase of this particular project, which says, what would that in real terms look like? What would, if we choose to retender, which isn't there, we haven't made that formal decision. If we were to, what would that actually look like? So just a little bit of clarification on those 2 points.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Summers and then Councillor Norman.
Thank you, Chair. Basically, I'm not sure whether I'm asking questions or reading statements here, but we'll try. Go ahead. 2 things that bother me in council is interim and in-house. Interim staff, while I appreciate you're both interim, you really should be full-time as far as I'm concerned. We've had so many issues in council with interim, they leave and then somebody else has to get caught up. So I'm a great believer in having full-time staff, and I'll be happy when our interim staff are come on full-time. Thank you. In-house depends on the service. Belford BT has the qualifications and the equipment to do the job. One of the issues, as far as I'm concerned, this is from my own management days, is lack of management. Managing the contract should be a priority. I'm not sure over the years, maybe you're changed now and you're improving that, but managing the contracts over the years that I've seen in council, in my 7 years, have been quite poor. We haven't held to account the people that work, they're doing work for us, I don't think. Locality stewards, for example, they could be brought in-house. Management could be brought in-house and make sure that works, because if we tell Belford BT what to do, then they'll probably do it. If we let them do what they want, they'll do whatever makes money for them. So I think, would you agree, asking Mark this now, that we really need to watch management rather and bring in good managers in-house, like I hope you two are, that will do the job that we need.
Before Mark comes in there, I think Councillor Summersfield benefit, on page 66 of the agenda,
Councillor mentioned.
Well, it's good to hear again.
66.
Yeah, but if just, in the context of your questions, it might be helpful for you just to refer to paragraph 26.
Thank you.
But, obviously I'll let Councillor Harrington or Mark, I'm not sure who put their hand up first, but I'll leave it to you to decide.
I will use my cabinet member discretion to go first, and then Mark can follow up. Just in terms of interims, Councillor Summers, it's a fair point. Unfortunately, it's a malaise, or it's something that's across all authorities at the moment. It is unfortunately a seller's market. We struggle to get full-time people to fill some of our posts. Having said that, certainly in Alex's case, because he's doing a certain set of work for a certain time, it suits to be an interim practitioner just before the contractor. But that's how we handle that. In terms of managing the contract, I think that's the problem. I mean, as I said, it's very easy and sometimes convenient for us to in the public domain to be blaming Balfour Beatty for things. It is because they're delivering work that has had a reduction in money attributed to it for many years. In actual fact, it is us, you're right, it is us as managers that are not doing the job correctly, and that is why we think that if we were able to bring the management sector of this, or the highway, the technical staff in-house, that would be able to have a better understanding and satisfy ourselves. Not that the job hasn't necessarily been done properly before, we would certainly be satisfied in that regard.
So from a contract management perspective, that was part of the reason the Major Contract Improvement Board was brought into fruition, was brought to bear, in terms of looking at how we as a council used to manage the contract. So commissioners and contract managers were effectively one and the same people, and you can't have that. That's not a good way of doing business. So the teams now are very distinct and very separate. And I know he's in the room, but I'm sure Mark Dollar-Joy will tell you there's a lot more tension, constructive tension, between the two parties now than there was a year ago, 2 years ago. So that natural good contract tension now exists. It's important to remember that we are commissioning work. As commissioners, we choose what we want to go and do. So Balfour Beatty may well play us an annual plan back that we feel, actually, I don't like that annual plan. Please go away, reframe it around this particular aspect of the service. And that's a contractual correspondence that we have to go through in terms of who takes on the risk of not doing the work that Balfour Beatty have said they want to go and do, who takes on the risk or backs out the risk for the work we are going to go and do, or force Balfours down that way. So we are, as commissioners, very able to point Balfours in the direction that we as a council want to go. And if you like, ignore their professional advice and look more towards what is causing us pain and problems in the business. In terms of interim people, I'm wholly on board with interim people not staying for too long. We have we should be getting out for advert very, very shortly, the role of head of contract management, head of highways, and the head of transportation. So those 3 roles should be filled hopefully within the next 4 or 5 months.
You know, I agree with what you said, what you're doing now, like the development that you're doing. I just want to see. I want to hear from your mouth, to be frank, and I want to see it working. I know it's what people want to see, but I also want to make sure that it's what's going to happen, because we really need to manage. For example, locality stewards. I know there's been talk about that would be the ideal thing to bring in-house. Whether we can or not is 2 different things. But we really need to be managing, and if I'm hearing that from you, then I'm happy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Norman.
Right, thank you, Chair. My question really, we've moved on somewhat, but it follows on from Councillor Durkin's point, but a lot of the issues that have been discussed are relevant. So my particular interest and focus is on public rights of way, which has also been brought back into the House. I think, having spent many years in the wilderness as a bit of a sort of Cinderella issue, it's now seen as very important, both to all of us for our health and well-being, and perhaps equally important are the attraction of visitors. So it is important. We've brought it back in-house, and yet I think we'd all agree it really hasn't improved to any great extent, for whatever reasons that there might be for that. My question, I suppose, really is it because it is still not fully recognised as having huge value to us in every way, financial as well as health and all the rest of it? Or is it because of staffing, or is it because it is so small? I think it's a difficult one, because it's one that specifically involves working with the public. We have hundreds of volunteers out there who are willing and able to help us with this, and yet we're not engaging with them, we're not looking after them, we're not responding to them, and they will disappear if we don't begin to do that. So there may be good reasons why things have taken so long, but I suppose part of my double question is it partly because it truly isn't yet recognised as being important, or is this a flavour of what we might face if we do take other things back in-house? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Norman. So I think everyone values public rights of way very highly. I don't think the issue is that we don't value it highly. I think the issue is, once again, as Councillor Durkin has suggested, there have been issues bringing staff back in-house because people are using that opportunity to retire. It's a natural break point for them. And that has been something that we're going to have to make sure that we plan for very carefully. And I think that's one of the reasons why Alex and Mark are saying that we need that period of 2 years potentially, or a year and a half, to make sure that we get that plan in place. In relation to Proud, the problem is, once again, money. There isn't enough money to do the things we'd like to do, and there could never be enough money to do the things that we would like to do. And there's 2 issues there. There's the DMMO modifications, the applications to put things on maps, because we had the 2026 deadline through the Crow Act, which has thankfully now been dropped in no small part because myself and Councillor and Jessie Norman and Duncan Green wrote repeatedly to the Minister. But that is a statutory duty that we have to go through those DMMOs, and they take time and they take money. So we're looking at how we can deal with that backlog. The issue in terms of resource is, how do we get volunteers to do the work they want to do and are desperate to do, and often very capable people, either parish footpath officers or ramblers or other organisations. And one of the justifications, one of the reasons for bringing the service in-house, was that because Balfour Beatty is a professional company working in a different way, they own the risk at the moment. Well, they did own the risk, for example. They own the risk at the moment on highways, technically, although not strictly speaking for everything. But they owned the risk on Proud, so they didn't really use volunteers in the same way. And we have had meetings, and actually you've had probably people saying that not everything's working well, but I've seen the amount of work we've done, especially on the Herefordshire Trail, that we have directly intervened, put lots more bridges in, and we've obviously bid for some more structures bridges now. So the meeting that we had before Christmas, we're having another meeting with footpath officers and ramblers and LAF members, and essentially what we've got to do is button down on what they can legally do, how they can do it against what insurance, whether that be parish insurances or ramblers insurances, so that we can make sure that volunteers can do that work for us, because that is the only way we're going to get through the backlog, is by using the very valuable and very well, very experienced expertise that's coming from there. So we haven't done it perfectly. We're working on it, but it is a better system to use because we'll be able to use the volunteers. Mark, did you want to say anything on that?
We were lucky on Friday to be awarded another £200,000 to invest in public rights of way network, so that's really good news. We'll be looking now how we're going to allocate that money. John mentioned the fact that BBRP are a tier 1 contractor. Health and safety is the centre of all that they do, and I think we have to adopt that same model. We have to make sure people who are going out working on the council's behalf are doing things in a safe and manageable way, and they're not taking risks that we wouldn't want them to take. It's not, we're effectively employing them, even though they're volunteers. We're asking them to do stuff and they're going out on a network. So they're working under our guidance, as it were. So we are working to get some method statements and risk assessments together that people can go and use to put those things together. It's also making sure that people who go out and do things are adequately supervised. So we may have some really competent people out there. We may have a whole band of people that are just willing volunteers and just need guidance. So it's how we engage with those people, the competent people, and almost willing to take on that Ganga role to guide people to make sure they're not taking unnecessary problems and risks.
Thank you very much on that. But just if I could doubly stress, the bit that doesn't cost a lot or cost anything very much is the engagement. It's absolutely key that you keep the volunteers, informed, involved, and sadly that hasn't happened as well as it should have. So I'm glad to hear the way things are going and looking forward to that meeting. But that's the important one, is that we give them that respect and treat them, properly and keep them informed and involved. Thank you.
Yeah, so just on that, John mentioned we were meeting again with the PFOs next month. We've actually got a whole day set aside for meeting with the PFOs down at the Hark. It'll be 2 sessions.
So what PFOs? Because people are...
Parish footpath officers.
Thank you.
So the parish footpath officers in the Hark, 2 sessions, one morning, one in the afternoon, identical sessions. It's just we haven't got a room.
Sorry again, what's the Hark? Because people out there don't know what these things are. Sorry.
The Hereford Archive Resource Centre, isn't it? Something like that.
Well, I just know. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Just people out there don't know what you're talking about.
So we are meeting with them, Councillor Norman, and we will be looking to step up that engagement as we move through.
Chairman, can I just say to you, what Mark's just been saying, it's the law of the land now, health and safety and vicarious liability.
Yeah.
We need to have it. It's not something we're going to invent. It's something we need to have when we put people out there, even volunteers.
I completely agree, Councillor Durkin, but the issue is that if someone like Balfour Beatty is doing the work, they pretty much won't let anyone else take that risk. They will say this, you've asked us to do this, you've given us this responsibility, we'll do it. So what we're saying is, if we want to use volunteers to do the same work, we've just got to work out how that will be covered off in terms of insurance. Will Herefordshire Council take it, the risk, or will it be done through parish footpath officers saying, well, we can do a little bit of work through our own parish council insurance on this particular route, etc.
I think the essential word here is who is employing them. If it's the Balfour Beatty, it's their rules. If it's the council, it's council rules. This employer is the one that decides.
Exactly. Well, we're not employing people. We're asking people to do voluntary work.
Well, you're still employing.
Well, that's a different thing. Sorry, Councillor Durkin, it's a different thing because they're volunteers. So we just need to be assured they're still working on our network. You're right, which we have ultimate responsibility for. So we have to be assured that they're covered by some insurance, but it doesn't have to be ours. But that's what we're looking at.
Okay. We've gone past the standard time for our meeting, so is everyone content to continue? Yes, all in agreement? Good. Bit of housekeeping there. Right. So, Councillor Durkin, you've had your say. We'll come back to, you've got a question. Was that your question?
No. But I've got a point on that as well, actually, if I could come in.
Okay. Councillor Durkin.
Thank you. I'm looking at...
Councillor Kenyon's next to speak anyway.
On page 64, I'll ask two points in one here to save some time. Looking at paragraph 17, in particular paragraph 18, and I'm looking at the additional cost to deliver these new functions has been found in existing resources, but it's not sustainable in the long term. And paragraph 19, some challenges related to service delivery for both the council and DPLP. My questions are sustainability of the functions and the costs thereby. I don't see anything in this document that addresses that, nor do I see anything in the document about the challenges, how they're going to be overcome or met in paragraph 19. There's 18 and 19 basically, yeah.
Okay, there you are. How are the challenges going to be overcome?
And also the costs.
Okay, so that I'll let Mark and Alex come in and answer that. There will be some assurance on that, but the point is what we identified here is a preferred option to look at further. We're not implementing it. This won't be implemented. We won't be actually doing further work on this until after the election, so that whoever is in, So and then we will take a decision at the end of this year about whether or not this is what we go for. So I suppose the detail on that will come out, but we have got.
My point, Chairman, is it's not. In my opinion, it's not made clear in the statements.
Understood.
If the two statements were caveated on what you just said, I can understand it. But what it says here, it says that we're going forward. We don't believe there's going to be enough money or resources or challenges, but hey, we're going to go ahead. That's how I'm reading it.
Okay. Mark, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, so certainly. So paragraph 18 deals with people like Alex and myself.
Yeah.
So we are interim people, traditionally more expensive than full-time people, fully employed people by the council. So I've already said we've got 3 adverts out for the heads of contract manager and head of highways and the head of transportation. And Ross, I'm sure, has in his mind the plan to replace me as a service director. So bringing the cost of those interim people far to within an envelope that council can afford long term, rather than employing interim people long term on that as well. That helps in terms of those budgets. We were always going to have those challenges. We've had inflation this year running at 10-15%, and those problems will continue to address us. And working with John, we will continue to lobby government to up our capital settlements. So actually, the work we do this year, we can do again next year, but it'll have to be within a bigger cost envelope.
I understand what you're saying, Mark. My point is that 18 and 19 should reflect, in my opinion, that although it's an aspiration, it is for the future to be dealt with.
Yeah.
I don't see that in the 18 and 19.
No, we can cover that. Thank you.
If that could be a point to be made, Chairman, 18 and 19 needs to be reworded.
Okay.
I have to do it anyway, but if you want it as a recommendation.
Well, I don't think.
I'll leave it up to you, Chairman.
I think the point has been made. Councillor Kenyon.
Thank you, Chairman. Just picking up on what Councillor Norman said about public rights of way. Well, I've got a live report at the moment, so I'm going to be interested to know how that turns out. If they need to make any notes, Mark, I'm sure they'll work through it by themselves. But just for interest, there's 70 trig points in Herefordshire, and I'm this year with my wife, I'm going to walk every one of them. So it means walking on lots of footpaths and the like. I see good footpaths, bad footpaths, and signs missing, especially for people with the footpath goes in someone's garden. They're very happy to rip it out of the way so people to go that way. But that aside, when you do these walks, some of the signs on there are getting a bit old and tattered and that sort of stuff. But if there was a simple sign, little round disc that could be put on a post saying, if there's any issues on this footpath, ring this number. That would go a long way, because people that have walked those paths are passionate about doing it. And so that's the point about that. And I also like to say about volunteering. Now, there's different ways. I agree that there needs to be some sort of structure, but it doesn't want to be too heavy, because volunteers are exactly that. I volunteer for the NHS Trust here, and I have to do some online training every year, which is fine, not too odious. I sit there, go through it all, it reminds me of the things I'm expected to do and all the rest of it. So that's quite easy. I know that the litter pickers, the fantastic Purple Bag Brigade, I'm one of them, I'm proud to be. They're all over the place. You see these purple bags around Herefordshire, most people don't have a clue what they are. But that's people volunteering, picking up rubbish from all sorts of different places. And they take a sensible, common sense approach. And that's obviously what we need to be doing here. But then again, the railway station, some of those volunteers, they did the garden beds at the railway station. They had to do some formal training with Network Rail before they were allowed on to do any. So there's different levels. So let's not clog people up from volunteering. Let's find an easy sort of medium where people can go out and do these things. Because carrying a hammer, a few nails and some posts, walking through a footpath from one end to the other, it's not too odious to knock an nail in. And apart from teaching not to bang the end of the thumb, that's about as much as you need to tell them. But that aside now, made that point. I did write some stuff down because often I waffle on and the chairman has to pull me back in. But I wrote this down, whether I can read my writing or not. It's about listening to what you've been said and my feelings at this moment. So I'd like to thank you for this report because I know it's an excellent report and a lot of hard work has gone into it. Some of the parameters you use for judging and that sort of stuff, I'm not too sure about, but it's there. So I'd like to put that on public record as well. That's a lot of the work undertaken by Balfour Beatty Living Places is done to a very high standard. But often they're made to do mark their own homework, which isn't right. And as I understand, we're going to be bringing that back inside. Because you can't do a job and say, yeah, that's great. And then a layman goes along and says, well, that's not great. You know? So we need to get that back in, absolutely get that back inside and have the expertise within the council to know that that is right and that is wrong, know the levels. So we need that expertise. If large projects come in, like road collapsing, or bridges being built, perhaps one on either side of the city, that'd be a fantastic job. So bridges being built, big ones, to help with infrastructure, we should be free to go anywhere we want to get the job done. It's just a little reminder, John, I know it was pain and you took a lot of the rap on the shoulders for this. The Found Hope Road was awful. The amount of time those people in Found Hope were cut off from their county city by a roadfall was unacceptable. And we need to make sure we learn from that and it doesn't happen again. You know, if we could have gone elsewhere to other places, we could have got that done far quicker and you never know, even more cost effective. This what we're talking about now is for the next 10 years. The next 10 years. Yeah. So we need to be looking hard now to make sure we get it right. And I have every confidence in Alex and Mark. However, you know, the interim, they may be gone in 6 months and that's the end of it. And if we don't get it right, who's carrying the can? It may be that us as councillors aren't here anymore. So this is how important this decision we get it right. Now I know it straddles the elections in May, but I just put it written down here that the decision is a way off, but I feel that all existing councillors should be brought up to date about what's going on. So they've got an opinion because some of these councillors have got vast amounts of experience that could be lost in the May elections. Some might think they're hopefully lost, but there we are. And after the elections, that all councillors are briefed straight away as soon as possible about it. Now there'll be some very new and inexperienced councillors, so it needs to be sort of almost led by the hand to ensure they know all the ins and outs of it. Because by the end of this year, is it, the decision will be made by whichever administration is in administration. So we need to make sure that that's done. So I'll leave it on there, but thank you very much for this report. It is good.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, please,
So I won't go into Proud too much because it's not in the contract anymore, but I take the points you make on board, and that's exactly what we want to do, common sense approach. The basic trainings we need to do, make sure we know who's covering it, because it's not just a case of them whacking the nail, it's they might put a bridge in that we ask them to do, and it's the wrong size and someone falls over and hurts themselves. So
and the wrong nail.
We'll cover that, but that's exactly what we want to do. We want to do it practical as possible, otherwise we won't get through the backlog. And also it's valuable resource, it's just crazy not to use. Just in terms of really large contracts like bridges, etc., that always will go out to public tender. That it has to. What we have in the contract currently, or what we had in the contract, is a clause that we could use Balfour's if we want to. Us as a council, as administration, don't tend to do that unless it's an emergency. So that always exists. And big contracts must go out to public tender. Just in terms of the expertise, exactly right. As I said, I don't think Balfour's have done a bad done a bad job, but unfortunately we're not monitoring that with staff that are directly employed by the council. Then how do we get that assurance that we know that that work is being done to the standard we want? And that's the constructive tension that Mark and others are talking about, which Balfour's are quite happy to accept as a challenge. So all those points taken on board. And the final point, I think that's a very good idea to stick a report out to all members to explain where we are, and either side of the election to refresh that as well. I'm quite happy to do that as suggested.
Okay, so we've got a recommendation.
Absolutely, please.
Can I ask a question? we're talking about Balfour Beatty, but it could be any contractor relationship. So it's not who's providing the service, but I'm keen to think about the relationship we have. There seems to be sometimes this tension in the public when they're concerned about highways matters. Who's responsible? Yeah. Is it the contractor or is it the council? And the council will say, well, we pay the contractor to do this work. And then the contractor will say, well, you give us a set amount of money, so we are prepared to do this. But you know, in terms of, for example, in the context of highway safety, you know, who's responsible when it comes to highway safety? Now, the maintenance, I understand it, is the responsibility of the contractor, but it's the council that's the overall responsibility for highways issues. And I know I've raised matters in the ward I represent where not quite clear when it comes to certain issues about highway safety, about the quality of the road, about the safety markings on the road, where that responsibility lies when it comes to saying, well, here's a problem, who's taking responsibility for it? And I've had emails that I've sent to people and the contractor says, oh, no, that's Herefordshire Council, and then I've received emails from Herefordshire Council officers saying, no, that should be something the contractor deals with. And so, in this model moving forward, is there a clearer way of understanding where I think I should be tackling the issue, in my understanding, rather than what is now, where I seem to be not clear on who's got responsibility for dealing with some of the issues I've got? I'd like a newer model that clarifies that more.
So I'll answer that, and then Mark and Alex might provide actual coherent detail. But the point is exactly that, because we've got a subcontractor or a partner, and because they handle so much of the contract at the moment, and that contract in 2013 was so overwhelming, including putting things like PROW and traffic management into it, which was unusual, we kind of did absolve ourselves or abdicate responsibility as a council. I agree with that. Now, obviously, our contractor is very happy to be that public face. They've taken the risk in the nature of the contract that they've got at the moment. They've taken the risk. So, in other words, the risk sits with them as our highway subcontractor. But the issues that you mentioned around who do you speak to, who's responsible, these are all things that need to be clarified. And we need to have one point of reference, and the ideal situation would be, and this is what I am hoping, is that we'd be speaking essentially to Herefordshire Council folks who would go and speak to our contractors, our partners on issues. We wouldn't have this bouncing backwards and forward, which is an unfortunate, I think, construct of the nature of the contract, and we don't want that. And partly is because Balfour's have also got comms essentially for highways, and really comms should sit, I think, with the council. That's one of the things we're looking at. Mark, would you just like to sort of follow or Alex?
Yeah, so we could spend all day talking about who's responsible for what aspect. So the Highways Act puts that responsibility very clearly onto the council, and it's not a responsibility we can give away to anybody else except for a district council, bizarrely. We have a contract with Balfour Beatty, which is very clearly sets out the risk and who takes the risk. But it's also important to remember that we don't necessarily give Balfour Beatty enough resource to go and do absolutely everything that's out there. Hence the requirement for an annual plan, and for Balfour's to come back with understanding, well, actually, if you do this, then we together are going to manage our risk in the best possible way, which is why Balfour's do the annual plan, and we traditionally don't. What we do rely on Balfour's for is that investment plan coming forward that tells us if we were to bid for £50 million and invest it in Y, then actually you'll have a network that is almost risk-free, and we can look at renegotiating our fee. He says very, very hopeful that we could renegotiate a fee for that sort of risk transfer. So the new model, as is described here, it'll be a fat client with a traditional term contractor sitting behind it. So we will be the ones commissioning the contractor to go and repair potholes. We're the ones commissioning contractors to go and reline roads, that sort of thing. So the new model, it'll be very clear. Come to Herefordshire, we'll give you the answer.
Herefordshire Council.
Herefordshire Council.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Well, we've got Councillor Durkin and then Councillor Summers.
Thank you, Chairman. Page 68, item number 34. I'd just like some confidence building, really. It says the contract has a 2-year no-fault termination clause, which both parties can enact at any time, which is proposed to be retained. Great, divorce. What happens if Balfour BT say, that's it, I've had enough, I want out? Is there a contingency built in as a backstop, so if we do get presented with a divorce, we can actually, we've got plans to deal with that?
I'll get the officers to give the technical detail, but yeah, he or she couldn't leave in the night with all the clothes and all our LPs, no.
So, just picturing Balfour Beatty leaving the building with an LP. So, and the 2-year termination clause is there to give us a very, very tight timetable to re-tender the contract. You can do it in 2 years. You're not necessarily going to get the best of what you want, so you may well go out with a slightly tempered model as to where you want to go to. But it's to give both parties A, time for Balfour to demobilise, and B, to give us time to actually get another partner into contract to start and take over the work.
So it's a 2-year period as well.
2-year period, yes.
That's what that's exactly what I'm asking, I think.
Yeah.
My point is, I have no confidence in 34 that if they said tomorrow, for example, we want out, do we have on the shelf a plan of action that we can take off and dust off to do within 2 years to get a decent contract for the council for the next provider? It's just a bit of belt and braces, if you like, but I don't see anything in that document there, in that section there, that tells me that we are prepared if she goes off with a 90 and a LP.
That's a fair question, and I think the point is that to look at a re-procurement would take about 2 years.
Yeah.
So we've built that into the request that that's what they give us. What you're saying is that we've got a plan somewhere to sort of contingency plan if this does happen. I think the short answer is no, we didn't, but because of all the work we've just done now, we do, but I'll let Alex come in. But I suppose it's a 2-year period is that grace period to allow us to get through anything.
I understand it, but sorry, Jim, I'll come back. Well, just to clarify, what I wanted to see here is the confidence that you have something in place, that you can actually do something within, 2 years is a small time, that we're not going to be left high and dry at the end of 2 years.
The first thing is we have been engaging with Balfour Beatty regarding the direction of travel and the report. So maintaining that relationship is the key thing, and obviously we don't want that termination clause from either party. In terms of the 2 years, in terms of a re-procurement, if you had a 6-month period, say you received that notification, you would have a 6-month period where you would pull all that information together, tender documents, go out to the market, etc. The procurement process itself, a full 2-stage process, is about a 9-month process. So you'd comfortably run that within the 2 years, and then you could have your 3 to 6 month mobilisation phase. And the likelihood is if that happened, you would then procure with a new provider, and a lot of the existing staff from the current provider would transfer to that new provider. So that's why the 2 years is the 2 years, because that is the period we would need. So I think that 2 years would be sufficient period.
Okay, I understand, but I'm going back to what Mark says about having a not very secure, after 2 years perhaps being at the end of a process where we haven't got such a robust contract because we haven't had enough time after 2 years. I'm just trying to look at this and give myself some confidence that we are actually going to be able to do it within 2 years, because all the donkey work, if I can call it that, has been addressed, and it's just a tick in the box type thing.
So I guess the only thing that's stopping us now from going out with this particular operating model is the governance. So we just have to get that emergency governance in place to give us that permission. This is the model. It's been through scrutiny. It's been scrutinised. You're as happy with it as you can be.
Yep.
Now, are you happy as a council for us to progress to a contract and go to market and do obviously all the work that sits behind making sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed to make sure it's fit for purpose?
But could that reassurance be given in 34? That's my question, just to make sure that we are reassured that we're not starting from scratch on day one. When the door closes behind her with her LP, you know.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'd like it written.
I think the point's been made.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Summers.
First of all, I'd like to reiterate what my member to the right has said about this is Jim. Kenya, councillor, Kenya, one and only. This is a really good read, okay, to be very frank with you. My concern, as always, is that interim period where we have a new director and it takes about 6 months to a year to catch on to everything and follow up. In the past, I may be wrong, but directors have just new directors have come in and they've gone to the easiest way out and like gone to above and we'll do what you tell us to do. We want the new director to follow this really well, and we need to make sure that that is black and white so they can't get away from it. So I know whoever takes over from Councillor Harrington or me or whatever can make sure that's happening. So yeah, great stuff. We just need to make sure that we don't lose that. For example, I'm not going to use it for an example here now. 106 minus, we're going along really well, and then suddenly we've lost that person. The new one comes in, we start all over again, and that's a big issue. It really hurts our parish councils because they don't know where they stand. They're talking to one person, they get all the information they want, they made promises, or they think they made promises, and suddenly it's fallen through. So the transition of takeover is it's just a transition.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. So so this is this whole piece of work is Alex's piece of work, and as he's pointed out, despite the fact it's written on his thing, he's an interim. He's employed by us for as long as necessary to finish this piece of work off, and will be here for as long as necessary, barring anything happening, which we don't want to happen to Alex.
Yeah, as a project.
As a project. So he's here for the duration. Mark, as you say, is Mark's going up to advertise for someone to fill his role permanently. But whoever comes in will be referencing everything that Alex is doing, and obviously this piece of work, and the fact that we've made sure all the other councillors and political parties were involved in this means there should be that memory.
Yeah. No, my only concern, Councillor Harrington, is that all the work that you're doing, that a director doesn't come in and say, I don't like this, I'm going to change things, or something of that nature, that the work that is done, this director knows when he's hired, this is what we're doing going forward, rather than say, okay, I've come from another place where we've done it this way, I'm going to do it this way.
No,
that's all I'm saying.
No, so officers and our project manager have been given very clear direction politically about what we'd like.
Okay.
Now, if there's a check, and the whole reason about trying to make sure that everyone understands this, if whatever happens in May or otherwise, there's that continuity there. We don't want, but people can turn around and say, I don't like this, I want to change it politically. But in terms of officer-wise, they've been given a direction, and they're following it through. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Last time we met to discuss this, we raised the issue, of in recalibrating, looking at recalibrating the contract. Was there an opportunity for this council to allow greater commercial opportunities for the council? That's been shelved, that's been put to one side, that's not seen as something viable. I mean, I know Alex was talking about economies of scale when using smaller contractors. Is that something that is just not something that the model would pursue?
I think in terms of the smaller contractors, local SMEs, etc., I mean, that isn't predicated by the current arrangements, because Balfour Beatty deliver a lot of the services by the subcontractors, and that can be a changing position. So that the current model wouldn't exclude any of that, and the costs that come through from Balfour Beatty are the costs of those subcontractors under the contract. So we have catered for that within the current model. So it's just.
Do you mean how could we make some money?
Yes, yeah. I heard. I'm just reflecting on the point you made earlier on. But if you recall, the point was made that this council used to make its own signs and make money out of that, and so the operating model where we're bringing proposal to bring stuff in-house, but more to do with management, rather but is there an opportunity to make, allow greater commercial opportunities for this council?
It's certainly something we can work into the model, and we are looking at, we've got our operational performance measures, which are in the report, but as part of the new model, we want to put in a new range of strategic performance measures, and that could be about working in partnership with our contractor, about bringing opportunities for commercialisation, innovation, new ways of working, and measuring all of that thing while we're designing the new contract, and also going forward, because where we go from 2025 in a long-term arrangement, we want to continually improve the contract and introduce new measures throughout that. So I think that's the key thing. We want to get in a good place from 2025, but have it set up where it evolves over the duration. So it's certainly something we can
keep that flexibility.
Yeah, yes, and if I'm being candid, I don't think we have pursued that as fully as we want to. We have looked at the sign thing and decided that would not be viable, but actually we'll make sure that we do make sure that this model includes how could we commercially offer services that didn't detract from our ability to perform our own duties, but gave us the opportunity to subcontract for other people and make some money for the council, because we ain't got enough funding coming, so we might as well look at it.
Well, when the council is faced with making cuts and achieving efficiencies and things like that, where we're not making best use of an income opportunity, then we're missing a trick there, surely.
Agreed, and I think there's two slightly different income opportunities. There's the ones that, we've now got street works and permitting, which means that utility companies have to pay us to come to Herefordshire, whereas they didn't before. That's an income generating, function. But there is also just straightforward commercial opportunities that we can be looking at. We'll make sure we include that. I think we have done some work on it, but
Chairman, they do that with waste bins and that sort of stuff. Herefordshire Council do sell bins to businesses and that sort of stuff. Far too cheap, I would say.
Because if we're bringing in-house management services and skills there, is that something we could market for others to benefit from? Obviously, we don't want to water down our capacity.
No, it's a balance.
If money could be made, then why not make that part of the flexible model so that we don't shut the door on potential opportunities? Right. Okay. We have some actions and recommendations, and I'm keen to ensure that the meeting is wrapped up fairly swiftly from here on in. But is there any? This is the opportunity to ask more questions of this phase in recalibrating the arrangements for the public rail contract. Councillor Kenny.
Will the working group be ongoing? If things change, and if you up to date, working group that was working on the contract, and obviously you met several times via Zoom doing just that.
My intention is it would, yes, because it's been exceptionally helpful, and I'll also take on board what you said about providing an information note over prior and post-election.
And when you put out, Councillor Harrington, when you put out that briefing note, we'd like a special thank you to the members who made up that working group, and appreciate all of the contributions that they've made in this phase of where we're at in terms of re-looking at the contract, public ground contract.
It's been exceptionally helpful.
Okay, Councillor Summers, and then we can go to John Coleman to look at the recommendations.
I don't know how we can make a recommendation. I'd just like to make sure that the work that they're doing now will be passed on to the next director, and there's something in the report that makes sure that's a director, whoever that may be, performs the duties that we've discussed, etc., etc. So the information that you're doing, which is a great job, need to make sure the new director coming in carries on with that. I'm not sure how you can do that, quite frankly, that's not my forte, but is there any way we can do that?
Well, you might ask us for an assurance that we'll do it, we will. I mean, it's
the cabinet decision in March would develop this model.
Yeah, that's basically tells me, yeah.
Which is 2nd of March.
Yeah.
I think the point though is that it's all about continuity of making sure that everything that's progressing is going
keeps
to
going the same direction.
Move forward, and whatever the situation come May, there will be a new setup. There's not all councillors standing again, so there will be a new setup. And so I think that informing new members and members about where the council is at in reforming this contract will be a really important,
agreed.
important thing to make sure members are fully focused on the fact that this is where we're at. I keep saying that, but where we're at in this phase of re-looking at the contract. Right, if I can go to John Coleman now, please.
So,
And I'm afraid you've lost Councillor Davies as well.
So the first recommendation was formulated, I think, by Councillor Kenyon, which was that Herefordshire Council BBLP create a publicity campaign to raise awareness of how residents of Herefordshire can report potholes.
Can we just pause on that one? Councillor Kenyon, I think the point that Mark made is that we have to be careful that that type of publicity doesn't get used and abused. Any thoughts on that?
Well, if it is used and abused, it means the message is getting out there, because no news is bad news, and I would say just go for it and take it on the chin. The funnier, the better.
So we do have a campaign, but it's not, obviously what Councillor Kenny is asking us is not to create one, but to make sure we improve it, I would say.
TikTok.
And we can take some, we'll make sure we're not trying to make light of it, we're taking it, we're just getting the information out there in the best way we can.
Okay.
But get it out there on all the platforms.
If it's there, it's there. So
Yeah, you're happy with that?
yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant, okay, thank you, Councillor.
There's also an app which doesn't seem to work properly. Perhaps we could get some lessons on it, or to make sure it is.
Well, it works okay for me, but I take the point. We'll add that in,
Okay.
Part of the campaign publicity.
Okay. So on that recommendation, I've just changed the word from
Strengthen, excellent, good.
Action, Herefordshire Council BBLP more clearly communicate the opportunities for volunteers to support the work of HC and BBLP on, for example, litter picking, maintenance and improved access to local footpaths. Action, paragraph 18 to 19, and this is where I'm not quite sure if I captured this correctly, Councillor Durkin, but paragraphs 18 and 19 of the scrutiny report be clarified to explain that the budgetary pressures on contract delivery are future pressures.
That's what's fair summary.
I think that's the first summary of what Harry was asking.
Okay.
It's just about making sure that we're talking in the present tense here. It's looking to the future and saying we've got a plan.
This is the budget report coming on the March the 2nd, that's what we're talking about, but anything else needs to be clear.
Another recommendation was that the opportunity within contractual arrangements do not tie the council into using just one supplier for major infrastructure and locality works. I think possibly there's a clarification there, because I think Alex, you recognise that there is the opportunity for subcontracting.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that is still a valid recommendation.
I think this.
Sorry.
Sorry. I thought this one was perhaps more about the major. Was it about the major projects, about
bridges and things?
So I think it was more around major infrastructure, perhaps not the locality works.
So the action may be to clarify. Okay, we can clarify our capital projects.
I think the reason I'd like it there is because not a lot of people know.
No, they don't.
Okay,
that's true.
And if it's there, it's written will coming in afterwards will be reminded, because everybody thought that's where we had to go for a long time.
So we need to clarify how capital contracts are awarded.
Or can be awarded.
Or can be awarded, yeah.
So clarification is given on how contracts are awarded, and arrangements do not tie the council into using just one supplier for major infrastructure projects. Another action, assurances are given to the committee that internal expertise will be factored into the new model that enables HC to assess the quality of major infrastructure and locality works to quality assure the work of our contractors. Evidence is given to the committee that if a 2-year fault termination clause, if
no fault,
No fault, I beg your pardon. No fault termination clause, if enacted, would enable HC to move into new contractual arrangements within that 2-year period.
Okay, yeah.
Can I just, adequate contract,
Yeah, that's fine.
annual contract arrangements, new and adequate.
Okay, and then final recommendation, considerations are built into the new model for the in-house element of the council's operations to generate commercial income streams. And then the final action is that assurances are given corporate memories built into the transition arrangements from interim to permanent arrangements.
Is that where, sorry Chair, is that where we should put in about the notes going out, or we put that in an earlier recommendation, someone missed it?
Oh no, I think we should have a separate one just to inform members of.
We promised a note before and after the election.
Yeah.
All members.
All members to note the progress towards the establishing the details of the future public realm contract. Yes, Councillor Kenyon.
Thank you. Can I just probably thank John for putting into words the stuff I can't even remember what I said. So thank you very much. You've done an excellent job today.
Thank you. Well done, Tim.
Well, that's just confirming that we get a really excellent service from our committee staff, so thank you for making that point. And there are others joining us today who work behind the scenes as well, who are working very hard. Thank you for that.
Get in my good side.
I'll pay you later.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the recommendations and actions before us. I'll propose them from the chair. Everyone in favour of those? Everyone present has voted in favour of that. So that concludes this item on the agenda. There's one more item on the agenda briefly, agenda item 9. But before I go on to that, I'd just like to thank officers and Councillor Harrington and Councillor Davis for their contributions for this agenda item. Work in progress, but interesting and helpful to see that matters are progressing in the way that we think it's on the right track. Lots more to discuss and probably lots more to scrutinise, but we see where you are at this current stage and you have our recommendations. Okay, thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the work programme. There are no further scheduled meetings of this committee before the end of the municipal year, which is going for before the election. So there was one item that we haven't got round to discussing and scrutinising, which was the levelling up. But unless there's a meeting of this scrutiny committee before May, then that will be a work programme issue for the next this communities connected communities scrutiny meeting. Councillor Kenyon.
Thank you. Just to say, we always get these at the end of the meetings where everyone's tired and using my brain power. It's really good to get it perhaps at the top of the agenda. First thing we talk about, I know it means people have to wait a little bit, but it's never a very long discussion about the work programme. I'd like to see it right at the top of the agenda.
Okay, I think that's a very useful suggestion. So I think we'll bear that in mind for officers, will bear that in mind for the next committees that will ensue. Right, so I'd just like to thank the committee for all of your contributions today and for those members in attendance and for everyone's participation. And I now would like to close the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ben.
Can we